your wisdom be your armor, your compassion be your sword. May your strength be forged with mercy, your courage lives restore. Homeland, the country that I love, forever reign supreme. And when time stands still, my homeland, may heaven hold your dream.
Thank you for joining us for the 2025 Worldwide Muster Roll Call. Muster is the most sacred of Aggie traditions, reminding us that Aggies today will gather in hundreds of locations around the world in groups large and small and answer here for their friends and family. Each of those events will call a partial list with the names of Aggies we have lost since the previous muster. A list of names meaningful to that area and to the people attending each of those musters. Our worldwide roll call is a comprehensive roll call inclusive of the names called at each of our local musters, plus many more. It is the only muster that calls every name on the annual roll call for the deceased Aggies. We are grateful for the over 90 volunteers who are joining us today. The association is proud to present this worldwide muster roll call live from the Clayton W. Williams Jr. Alumni Center on the Texas A&M campus. By doing so, we uphold our solemn commitment to mark our fellow Aggies present in our hearts. And as you join in answering here, may you continue our noble tradition of muster and assure that the worldwide Aggie spirit endures. Thank you for your unending support of Texas A&M and Texas Aggies.
Roll call of the absent by Dr. John Ashton, class of 1906. Here. In many lands and chimes this April days, proud sons of Texas A&M unite. Our loyalty to country school we pay, and seal our pact with bond of common might. We live again those happy days of yore on campus, field, and classroom, at drill. Fond memory brings a sigh, but nothing more. Now we are men, and life is one great thrill. On Fortress Isle, 83 years ago today, a group of gallant Aggies, led by Moore, held rights which to us doth say, the spirit shall prevail, or cannon roar. They thought of home and all we hold most dear. Where are they now, those boys we knew so well? Ask of the winds, let smile repress a tear. Think only of their glory when they fell. Corregidor, more forevermore a hallowed name to countless sons of Texans yet unborn. Symbolic like, it stands for the deathless fame, a shrine sublime till resurrection morn. Softly call the muster. Let comrade answer here. Their spirits hover round us as if to bring us cheer. Mark them present in your hearts. We'll meet again some other day. There is no death but life eternal for heroes such as they.
The 2025 Worldwide Muster Roll Call comprises 2,327 names of Aggies whose deaths were reported to the Association of Former Students since the previous muster. Some of those deaths appeared more than a year ago, but the passing was not previously reported. So the name has not been called previously at any Aggie muster. The worldwide muster roll call will proceed from oldest class year to youngest, followed by the names of some honored faculty, staff, and friends of Texas A&M. Names that are initially called incorrectly will be called again in a correction segment at the end. For help finding a specific name in this roll call, please visit tx.ag/2025 directory.
Walton Henderson Elliott, class of 1916.
Here.
William Lawrence McCarty, Sr., class of 1916.
Here.
Xiang Yu Mo, class of 1917.
Here.
Vernon B. Glenn, Sr., class of 1919.
Here.
Ben A. Barber, class of 1935.
Here.
Charles W. Ferguson, class of 1935.
Here.
Walter Harrelson Hagan, class of 1935.
Here.
Curtis Eugene Hill, class of 1935.
Here.
Harry W. Johnston, Jr., class of 1935.
Here.
Major Thomas E. Carnes, Jr., class of 1935.
Here.
William F. Luce, class of 1935.
Here.
Patrick Ignatius Lynn, class of 1935.
Here.
James Young Orms, class of 1935.
Here.
Jesse Granville Parker, class of 1935.
Here.
Leslie J. Reagan, Sr., class of 1935.
Here.
Charles Earl Reed, class of 1935.
Here.
Dr. Rodney Francis Shelton, class of 1935.
Here.
Charles Ripley Shepard, class of 1935.
Here.
Eiley E. Stokes, class of 1935.
Here.
Robert Settle Taylor, class of 1935.
Here.
Benton A. Zorns, class of 1935.
Here.
Robert T. Mayberry, class of 1941.
Here.
Charles Leroy Walker, class of 1941.
Here.
James D. Wells, class of 1941.
Here.
Donald Forrest Bertolf, class of 1942.
Here.
Joseph K. Dew, class of 1942.
Here.
Robert A. Doak, Jr., class of 1942.
Here.
Leo D. Ellis, class of 1942.
Here.
Dr. Ralph Tillman Green, class of 1942.
Here.
Wiley E. Hearn, class of 1942.
Here.
Robert Dean Hesley, class of 1942.
Here.
Raymond L. Jarrett, class of 1942.
Here.
Colonel Robert C. Morris, Jr., class of 1942.
Here.
Charles R. Parkerson, class of 1942.
Here.
Munson H. Tix, Sr., class of 1942.
Here.
Dr. Julio E. Trigo, class of 1942.
Here.
Hinton H. Wilson, class of 1942.
Here.
Albert Mitchell Billingsley, class of 1943.
Here.
Robert J. Carr, class of 1943.
Here.
Dr. John Edward Johnson, class of 1943.
Here.
Luther Lee Marshall, Jr., class of 1943.
Here.
William H. Taylor, Jr., class of 1943.
Here.
Joseph M. Travis, class of 1943. Willie L. Adcock, class of 1944. Eugene B. Butler, class of 1944. Lieutenant Colonel Orgene V. Colvin, class of 1944. Dr. Samuel R. Gammon, class of 1944. Dr. Herbert Sachs Jacobson, class of 1944. Leander G. Menifee, class of 1944. Lauren S. Thompson, class of 1944. Ernest A. Bolland, class of 1945. Ralph Otto Dietert, class of 1945. James Edwin Gardner, class of 1945. Arthur F. Graff, Jr., class of 1945. Ray Samuel Little, class of 1945.
J.R. McElroy, class of 1945. Homer V. O'Reilly, class of 1945. Harold Albert Reich, class of 1945. Joseph Edward Robo, Jr., class of 1945. Blanton Snodgrass, class of 1945. Gilbert H. Barker, Jr., class of 1946. Dr. Henry V. Birdwell, Jr., class of 1946. James L. Busby, class of 1946. Leonard D. Kane, Jr., class of 1946. Edgar S. Dorman, Jr., class of 1946. Philip Getz, class of 1946. Bennett A. Goodman, class of 1946. Thomas Wharton Johnson, class of 1946. Charles Blakely Locke, class of 1946. Earl G. Stanford, class of 1946. Jose R. Arrieta, class of 1947. Donnell Ardle Ballard, class of 1947. Dr. Wilson H. Birdsley, Jr., class of 1947. Merle Clayton Borden, class of 1947. William Samuel Bolden, class of 1947. Richard Davis Branham, class of 1947. Charles Middleton Fitz, Jr., class of 1947. James H. Greer, class of 1947. Gerald K. Grogan, class of 1947. Reverend Claude W. Jacks, Jr., class of 1947. Jack D. Owen, class of 1947. Charles Wallace Presley, Jr., class of 1947. James Arnold Reese, class of 1947. James H. Stokes, class of 1947. John Roland Thompson, class of 1947. James Elmer White, class of 1947.
Joseph C. Bainey, Jr., class of 1948. Glenn Lewis Bell, class of 1948. Billy James Bertram, class of 1948. Dr. Joseph Patrick Brainy, class of 1948. George Henderson Brazel, class of 1948. Billy Edward Burns, class of 1948. Dr. Bernard Matt Cooley, class of 1948. Elvis Ray Cozart, class of 1948. The Honorable Charles Ray Holbrook, Jr., class of 1948. Hayward C. Hosh, Jr., class of 1948. Don E. McInturf, class of 1948. Raymond Leroy Portlock, class of 1948. Colonel William T. Rife, Jr., class of 1948. Leo Herbert Stakemiller, Jr., class of 1948. Grover Leon Wallace, class of 1948. Percy Graham Anderson, Jr., class of 1949. Donald H. Barrett, class of 1949. James Daniel Bell, Jr., class of 1949. Alton C. Brown, Jr., class of 1949. Ferdinando Michael Bruno, class of 1949. Richard Newton Butts, class of 1949. Dr. Paul D. Cretion, Jr., class of 1949. Rex M. Fordyce, class of 1949. Billy Jack Garner, class of 1949. Percy Edwin Gentle, class of 1949. Delbert Gray, class of 1949. Jack Lloyd Groff, class of 1949. Professor Samuel T. Lanford, class of 1949. Colonel Patrick William Marks, class of 1949. Clifford Knott McGowan, Sr., class of 1949.
James Richard Page, class of 1949. Edward H. Shaw, Jr., class of 1949. David Shepard Smith, Sr., class of 1949. Richard Houston Smith, class of 1949. W. Hiram Smith, Jr., class of 1949. Curtis Jean Timmerman, class of 1949. George Douglas Weatherston, class of 1949. Dr. Bill Dean Webb, class of 1949. Bobby Winford Wilson, class of 1949. Liston Merrill Barber, class of 1950. Billy Frank Spounds, class of 1950. Ralph Edward Birch, class of 1950. Robert Emmett Dillon, class of 1950. Juan Samuel Frias, class of 1950. Perry H. Humphrey, class of 1950. Dr. Robert L. Kilgore, Jr., class of 1950. Kenneth Vernon Lockett, Sr., class of 1950. Delbert George Massey, Jr., class of 1950. Major Raymond R. Medford, class of 1950. Alexander Hamilton Pegas, Jr., class of 1950. George Spencer Perry, class of 1950. Robert N. Pierce, class of 1950. John Wallace Roop, class of 1950. James Lee Schulz, class of 1950. Robert G. Skidmore, class of 1950. Homer Gene Smith, class of 1950. Lynn Thomas Stanley, class of 1950. Dr. Wesley M. Stevens, class of 1950. Dr. George N. Thomas, class of 1950. Hans Ross Wittenberg, class of 1950.
Irwin R. Baker, Jr., class of 1951. Lieutenant Colonel Jack D. Bond, class of 1951. Kenneth Don Cowling, class of 1951. Joseph C. Diabati, class of 1951. John R. Disharoon, class of 1951. Q. Dwayne Edwards, Jr., class of 1951. Luis R. Garza, class of 1951. Robert L. Giles, Jr., class of 1951. Dr. Ralph W. Grogan, class of 1951. Hal V. Haltom, Sr., class of 1951. Charles Edward Holcomb, class of 1951. Emil L. Shorty Huber, Jr., class of 1951. Donald R. Joseph, Sr., class of 1951. Floyd Eugene Kearns, class of 1951. J. A. Loftus, class of 1951. John Theodore Manor, class of 1951. James Fuston McCarty, class of 1951. Jack Torrance Medlin, class of 1951. Dr. Ralph Mock, class of 1951. Harry Emmanuel Newman, class of 1951. Robert Peyton Ramey, class of 1951. Robert Lee Smith, Jr., class of 1951. Lavelle Jones Stewart, class of 1951. William P. Stromberg, class of 1951. Mark Calvin Turner, class of 1951. James W. Wade, class of 1951. Dr. Billy Edward Welch, class of 1951. Charles R. Wheeler, class of 1951. James D. White, class of 1951. Lieutenant Colonel DeWitt Joseph Wickman, class of 1951.
Albert Roy Blair, class of 1952. Robert Alvin Bradshaw, class of 1952. Colonel Lacey W. Breckenridge, class of 1952. Robert F. Brown, class of 1952. Glenn Dell Bowie, class of 1952. Forrest Reagan Birch, class of 1952. Edward O. Burja, class of 1952. Joe Bill Carper, Jr., class of 1952. John Richard Cummins, class of 1952. William Robert Hale, class of 1952. Dr. Billy Wayne Henderson, class of 1952. Robert Henry Huggins, class of 1952. Marcus L. Keene, class of 1952. Perry Mark King, class of 1952. William Shepard Kester, class of 1952. Arthur McCardle, Jr., class of 1952. Donald Ray McCoy, class of 1952. Dr. Charles N. McDonald, class of 1952. James O. Patton, class of 1952. Lawrence Ross Tanner, Jr., class of 1952. James Robert Teutsch, class of 1952. William Houston Vaughn, Sr., class of 1952. Colonel Danny T. Waddle, class of 1952. Dr. Dale Edward Walston, class of 1952. H. Clay Warnock, class of 1952. William Dean Warren, class of 1952. Lieutenant Colonel Henry G. Williford, Jr., class of 1952. William Bryan Wilson, class of 1952.
Eldon R. Baker, class of 1953. Dr. Charles Blake Bragassa, class of 1953. James Richard Brannon, class of 1953. Robert Burns Brown, class of 1953. The Honorable Claude D. Davis, class of 1953. William J. Dumas, class of 1953. William H. England, class of 1953. Joseph F. Fritz, class of 1953. Wallace Jean Garrison, class of 1953. Dr. Daniel Morgan Gibson, Jr., class of 1953. James David Gorman, class of 1953. Fred N. Haddad, class of 1953. Harold James Hardcastle, class of 1953. Colonel Arthur M. Heath, class of 1953. James Rihar Lavinka, class of 1953.
Edward Anton Condoler, Sr., class of 1953. Joseph Jerome Lastelik, class of 1953. E. Lewis McGee, class of 1953. Jerry W. Patton, class of 1953. Dr. Lee J. Phillips, class of 1953. Harold G. Place, class of 1953. Alton K. Ritter, class of 1953. Rodolfo Rivera, class of 1953. Bob Warren Roberts, Sr., class of 1953. Martin Harold Scaife, class of 1953. William Harold Scott, class of 1953. Colonel Frank E. Sizer, class of 1953. Ray Keith Sloan, class of 1953. Gordon Lee Smith, class of 1953. William I. Strife, class of 1953.
Richard Carl Tanner, class of 1953. Frank William Trahan, class of 1953. Colonel John R. Vilas, class of 1953. Fred R. Waters, class of 1953. Berthold L. Weller, class of 1953. Roy Davis Wells, class of 1953. Dr. Calvin Lee Zobsick, class of 1953. Alvin Frank Ziober, class of 1953. Dr. Alan C. Alfrey, class of 1954. Charles Edward Baer, class of 1954. Gerald Bennett, Jr., class of 1954. Colonel Paul Garvin Boozman, class of 1954. Gilbert L. Brigham, class of 1954. Joe Francis Brockett, class of 1954. Alan Oscar Brosius, class of 1954. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Clifford Cox, class of 1954. Scott Clay Cutter, III, class of 1954. Robert W. Dameron, class of 1954. Guy William Dawson, Jr., class of 1954. Thomas M. Dodd, Jr., class of 1954. Arlette Clement England, Jr., class of 1954. Daniel D. Fleck, class of 1954. Sabit Gabe, class of 1954. Joseph William Gillespie, class of 1954. Arthur William Glazier, Jr., class of 1954. Colonel Bob Goebel, class of 1954. Colonel Robert Russell Gosney, class of 1954. Richard Love Harris, class of 1954. Colonel Frank Thomas Hines, class of 1954. Charles Joseph Lavinka, class of 1954. Raymond L. Hooks, class of 1954.
Donald Bain Horn, class of 1954. Colonel Orrin Thomas Renseer, class of 1954. Dr. William Ronald Hudson, class of 1954. Joseph C. Janica, class of 1954. John Duke Kimbrough, Sr., class of 1954. Ryborn Ray Kirby, class of 1954. Dr. J. Wayne Kyle, class of 1954. Herbert Neil Lakshin, class of 1954. Dr. Roger Q. Landers, Jr., class of 1954. Louis Edward Little, class of 1954. Lieutenant Colonel Lemuel E. Lockhart III, class of 1954. Robert H. Mansker, class of 1954. Stephen Joseph Novosad, class of 1954. Colonel Richard Lane O'Connor, class of 1954. Billy Joe Oglesby, class of 1954. Eldred Beamon Oldham, class of 1954. Richard William Randall, class of 1954. Stanley Burke Renfro, Jr., class of 1954. Edward Anthony Roberts, class of 1954. Leon Edward Rochin, class of 1954. Ted A. Rother, Jr., class of 1954. Earl W. Schumacher, class of 1954. Roger E. Sessions, class of 1954. Lieutenant Colonel George W. Skladel, class of 1954. Robert Allen Smith, class of 1954. Josh Mitchell Spedichin, class of 1954. Lieutenant Colonel Gene S. Stevens, Sr., class of 1954. John F. Stockton, class of 1954. Captain Rouse Jefferson Todd, class of 1954. James B. Jimmy Tyree, class of 1954.
Louis A. Benincasa, class of 1954. Charles F. Walla, class of 1954. John Edward Whitman, class of 1954. Joe Steve Williams, class of 1954. Walter F. Worthington, class of 1954. Gus Armin Wolfman, class of 1954. James E. Alston, class of 1955. Jerry Wayne Ash, class of 1955. Jones Edward Barton, class of 1955. Jim Ragsdale Batto, class of 1955. William W. Bradshaw, class of 1955. Alton Elwood Breedlove, Sr., class of 1955. James Roland Buchanan, class of 1955. James Richard Bullock, class of 1955. Colonel Val Howell Cannon, Jr., class of 1955. Dr. Roy Jean Cheney, class of 1955. Captain Harold L. Comer, class of 1955. Norris Lee Condit, class of 1955. Dr. Carl Edward Kopic, class of 1955. Richard Earl Counts, class of 1955. Henry Charles Coutre, Jr., class of 1955. Dr. John Irving Kozad, class of 1955. Ernest Walter Davis, class of 1955. Dr. Robert Blakesley Faust, class of 1955. Dr. John Ernest Frondelege, Sr., class of 1955. Benjamin Leon Hines, class of 1955. William Cecil Hobson, class of 1955. Buck Odell Isbell, class of 1955. Dr. Ray Joseph Murphy LaCour, class of 1955. James R. Mathis, class of 1955.
Joseph Raymond Matsky, class of 1955. Thomas R. McDade, class of 1955. Joe M. Mejia, class of 1955. Curtis Ray Mills, class of 1955. Paget Wayne Montgomery, Sr., class of 1955. Gerald Joseph Nelson, Jr., class of 1955. Sinwile I. Pearl, class of 1955. Robert W. Pittman, class of 1955. Gerald D. Pruitt, Sr., class of 1955. James Elmer Sadler, class of 1955. Gerald Burke Schultz, class of 1955. James L. Seymour, Jr., class of 1955. Horace R. Smith, class of 1955. Robert V. Smith, Sr., class of 1955. Carl Walter Southward, class of 1955. Billy Lynn Williams, class of 1955. Herbert John Wolfe, Jr., class of 1955. Jerry Dwayne Yates, class of 1955. Guy Hayden Andrews, class of 1956. Jack Warren Barbie, class of 1956. The Honorable Ogden L. Bass, Jr.,
class of 1956. Ashley N. Beasley, class of 1956. Lloyd E. Billingsley, class of 1956. Nathan Royce Boardman, class of 1956. Thomas Edward Bonorden, class of 1956. Carl Richard Bryan, class of 1956. Donald L. Burton, class of 1956. Rayford A. Cagle, class of 1956. James Addison Carey, class of 1956. Dr. Clifford Lawrence Condit, Jr., class of 1956. Carol James Cooper, class of 1956.
James Albertson Cohen, Jr., class of 1956. Dr. James Ronald Dickey, class of 1956. Merrill Morgan Douglas, class of 1956. Grady Eugene Durham, Jr., class of 1956. Edwin Glenn Eichner, Sr., class of 1956. Fred Wayne Galley, class of 1956. Ben Thomas Harris, Jr., class of 1956. Donald Edward Hightower, class of 1956. Alfred O. Hilgers, class of 1956. Donald Francis Kepperta, class of 1956. Cyril Joseph Lartigue, class of 1956. Thomas D. Longbrake, class of 1956. Leon Morris Lurie, class of 1956. James Garrett McKenzie, class of 1956. Ralph Eugene Morris, class of 1956. Robert Henry Pine, Jr., class of 1956. Sammy Eugene Ray, class of 1956. Ronald Lee Robbins, class of 1956. Floyd W. Rosenbaum, class of 1956. Tony Joe Salvaggio, class of 1956. Ed Martin Schwill, Sr., class of 1956. Charles Edgar Stinnett, Jr., class of 1956. Carl R. Williams, class of 1956. Joe Terry Wilson, class of 1956. Donald G. Arneson, class of 1957. Billy J. Arendt, class of 1957. Dwayne S. Dub Bailey, class of 1957. Joe Ned Baker, class of 1957. Leon Travis Bates, class of 1957. Alan C. Bell, class of 1957. Claude Patterson Bell, class of 1957.
Dr. Joseph L. Blair, class of 1957. Lieutenant Colonel Robert D. Blanchard, class of 1957. Aubrey Lee Burnham, class of 1957. James Howard Carr, Jr., class of 1957. Lawrence Everett Caspier, class of 1957. Ralph William Clement, class of 1957. Tom M. Connor, class of 1957. James Robert Crouch, 1957. Morris Lynn Daggerath, class of 1957. Donald R. Derby, class of 1957. Harry Victor Duckshine, class of 1957. Dr. Bannister Wells Farquhar, Jr., class of 1957. Dr. Ray Noble Finch, class of 1957. Joe Stephen Goodlett, class of 1957. James T. Graham, class of 1957. Jean Agil Griffin, class of 1957. Tommy L. Haley, class of 1957. Edward C. Hansen III, class of 1957. Marion D. Harville, class of 1957. Gerard Townsend Haynes, class of 1957. John Bob Hendrick, class of 1957. Emmett Logan Herod, class of 1957. Robert L. Hoover, Jr., class of 1957. Dr. Don Frank Houston, class of 1957. Charles David Jackson, class of 1957. Jean Lanier Jameson, class of 1957. Rudolph Michael Johnson, class of 1957. Theodore Charles Kester, Jr., class of 1957. Dick William Coop, class of 1957. James Calhoun Jim Leisner, class of 1957. Dr. Hewlin Matthews Madley, class of 1957.
Paul James Mason, class of 1957. Louis G. McKnight, class of 1957. Arva H. Menifee, Jr., class of 1957. John Emmett Nelson, class of 1957. Colin Drewy Nayland, class of 1957. Charles Lee Novy, class of 1957. Dr. Kenneth Guy Nunnally, class of 1957. Robert W. Opitz, class of 1957. Henry Del Parson, class of 1957. Thomas Ray Pleasure, class of 1957. Island K. Presswood, class of 1957. Charles R. Poles, class of 1957. Ross Robert Siegel, class of 1957. William Arthur Short, class of 1957. Layla Craig Smith, class of 1957. Thomas Winston Smith, class of 1957. Jim Ed Spencer, Sr., class of 1957. Carl Joseph Springer, class of 1957. Billy Ray Statham, class of 1957. Norman Joel Stevens, class of 1957. James Michael Stewart, class of 1957. William Don Tabor, class of 1957. David Allen Terry, class of 1957. Larry Lee Thurman, class of 1957. Joseph Evans Van Hasselen, class of 1957. Eloy R. Villa, class of 1957. Jeffrey Wan, class of 1957. Charles S. Ware, Jr., class of 1957. Alton L. Warren, class of 1957. Dr. David C. Wittenberg, class of 1957. James Duke Wilborn, class of 1957.
Dr. Drew Davis Williams, class of 1957. Colonel Robert D. Williamson, class of 1957. Wayne Russell Yeager, class of 1957. Fausto Iteria, Jr., class of 1957. Sam Bernard Zuccaro, Jr., class of 1957. Forrest W. Appleton, class of 1958. Benjamin William Bohuslav, class of 1958. James B. Brown, class of 1958. Thomas Demi Brunner, Sr., class of 1958. Charles W. Buck, class of 1958. Paul L. Burnside, Jr., class of 1958. Robert William Castor, Sr., class of 1958. Richard Andrew Chapman, class of 1958. James A. Cooper, class of 1958. Nathan Thomas Cotman, class of 1958. Dixon W. Colburn, class of 1958. Robert Earl Davidson, class of 1958. Bobby Lee Davis, class of 1958. John Andrew Dyfloff, class of 1958. John Rodney Dosher, class of 1958. Jimmy Dean Dye, class of 1958. Jeff Alonzo Forrest, Jr., class of 1958. Jimmy V. Goodman, class of 1958. William Charles Gillette, Jr., class of 1958. Delbert Floyd Hightower, class of 1958. Walter Johnson Holder, class of 1958. Donald Ray Hollister, class of 1958. Colonel Lowry Phillips Horton, class of 1958. Russell Hunn, class of 1958. Elmer L. Jacob, class of 1958. Jesse Hardy Jeffries, class of 1958.
Lon Don Johnston, class of 1958. Jack Monty Jones, class of 1958. Joseph Ronald Kimball, class of 1958. James G. Kimry, class of 1958. Richard Herman Kirchner, class of 1958. Ray W. Laird, class of 1958. Dr. Thomas Lowell Landrum, Sr., class of 1958. Joe T. Maddox, class of 1958. Kenneth Wayne Marquardt, class of 1958. 4G Martin, class of 1958. Dr. Wayne McAfee, class of 1958. Jim Milton McClure, class of 1958. Robert Donald McCord, class of 1958. Charles Arthur Mercer, class of 1958. Charles Owen Mickelson, class of 1958. James Michael Mooney, class of 1958. James Roland Moore, class of 1958. Edward Lewis Moses, Jr., class of 1958. Charles John O'Connor, class of 1958. R. Ray Rankin, class of 1958. Walter W. Rowe, class of 1958. Henry Keith Smith, class of 1958. James M. Sterling, class of 1958. Kenneth Ray Thomas, class of 1958. Donald F. Tucker, class of 1958. Jerry DeWitt Winkie, class of 1958. Joseph David Williams, class of 1958. Jerome L. Winkler, Jr., class of 1958.
Recording in progress.
Nye C. Withers, class of 1958. Isaac W. Woolsey, class of 1958. James Wright, Jr., class of 1958.
The Spirit of Muster by Joey Dean, class of 2005. For all the Ags who have gone before me, who gave all they had for all I now enjoy, our spirit I faithfully carry forward and try to leave a better world behind. Softly call the muster Ags and raise your candlelight. Gone but not forgotten, let him hear that old farmers fight. Today my voice is yours as I call here. I stand for fallen heroes, for those I hold most dear.
Jerry Lynn Andrews, class of 1959. Howard F. Beeman, Jr., class of 1959. Theodore Elias Beckman, Jr., class of 1959. Colonel Eugene A. Byer, class of 1959. L. David Black, class of 1959. Leopold David Black, class of 1959. William Robert Blackstone, class of 1959. Dr. James C. Boswell, class of 1959. Roger S. Boyd, class of 1959. Michael Henry Bronner, class of 1959. Lieutenant Colonel Jerry D. Brown, class of 1959. Dr. Oswald David Robert Brown, class of 1959. Alfred Earl Browning, Jr., class of 1959. Dan Byron Bunker, class of 1959. Autry R. Burns, class of 1959. Archie B. Carroll, class of 1959. Ronald Lee Carter, class of 1959. Joseph C. Christolis, Jr., class of 1959. Dr. Larry Dwight Claiborne, class of 1959. Here. George S. Kleins, Jr., class of 1959. Alvin Dice, Jr., class of 1959. Melton O. Denton, class of 1959. Dr. Charles W. Dio, class of 1959. Raymond L. Doucette, class of 1959. Dr. Wendell Edward Edwards, class of 1959. Frederick Lawrence Pfeiffer, Jr., class of 1959. Dr. Bob Preston Foster, class of 1959. Robert Craig Gooch, class of 1959. Bobby Markham Greenwood, class of 1959. Colonel Joe Larry Gwynn, class of 1959.
Phillips C. Hall, class of 1959. William Hammett Hardy, III, class of 1959. Jack Albert Hartsky, class of 1959. Cecil L. Heron, class of 1959. Thomas C. Hunter, Jr., class of 1959. Ralph E. Jackson, class of 1959. Charles Edwin Jones, class of 1959. Dr. John George Capsalis, class of 1959. Herbert Charles Kavanaugh, class of 1959. James Allen King, class of 1959. George Ivor Perry Lodine, class of 1959. Robert Earl Lunn, class of 1959. Odie C. Luna, class of 1959. Henry Fletcher Lyle, Jr., class of 1959. Darrell Eugene Martin, class of 1959. Samuel Ortiz Martinez, class of 1959. Brigadier General Don W. Mayhew, Jr., class of 1959. Jerry C. McDaniel, class of 1959. Carl Leland Medley, Jr., class of 1959. Ferdinand J. Mebus, Jr., class of 1959. Jack Martin Motherspaugh, Jr., class of 1959. Larry G. Myers, class of 1959. Dr. Frederick Allen Palmer, class of 1959. Richard Perez, class of 1959. Frank Pisano, class of 1959. James C. Presswood, class of 1959. Thomas Harvey Ray, class of 1959. James Francis Rosbrum, Jr., class of 1959. Colonel Harry C. Russell, class of 1959. Gerald E. Ryan, class of 1959.
Colonel Jackie Edward Schmidt, class of 1959. Robert Floyd Smith, class of 1959. Theodore Hart Spindle, Jr., class of 1959. Jack M. Spinks, class of 1959. Michael John Steger, class of 1959. John Olin Teague, Sr., class of 1959. James Francis Vickery, class of 1959. Carol Don Wallace, class of 1959. Joe Derek Wallace, class of 1959. Johnny Watts, Jr., class of 1959. Lieutenant Colonel Albert L. Yontis, Jr., class of 1959. Ronald Ricardo Abderhalden, class of 1960. John Mark Alvis, Sr., class of 1960. Kenneth Ray Ball, class of 1960. Colonel Ben W. Bolton, class of 1960. Gary Bernice Brim, class of 1960. James R. Bullard, class of 1960. Kelly Jean Chapman, class of 1960. Arthur Donald Chase, class of 1960. Jose Luis de la Fuente, class of 1960. William Richard Easter, class of 1960. William L. Everett, class of 1960. Clyde E. Farthing, Jr., class of 1960. Chester Lee Glenn, Jr., class of 1960. George William Gorson, class of 1960. Donald Knox Graham, class of 1960. Donald Ray Green, class of 1960. Dr. William Allison Gines, Jr., class of 1960. Jack Andrew Haney, class of 1960.
J. Doyle Harkins, class of 1960. Dr. David F. Hinges, class of 1960. Adrian G. Huggins, class of 1960. Aubrey M. Jameson, Jr., class of 1960. George M. Jones, class of 1960. Philip Adam Keitel, Jr., class of 1960. Lovell Williford Kirkendall, class of 1960. Dr. James Otis Lively, Jr., class of 1960. Lieutenant Colonel Norman Arthur Mathias, Jr., class of 1960. Lieutenant Colonel Winford Edwin Malden, class of 1960. Captain Michael D. McClelland, class of 1960. Travis Clark McLean, class of 1960. Stuart Ronald McLeod, class of 1960. Horace Franklin McQueen, class of 1960. Daniel E. Milton, class of 1960. Virgil E. Mullinax, class of 1960. Edward T. Neal, class of 1960. Alfred Richard Pate, Jr., class of 1960. Pat Bailey Patterson, class of 1960. Tyrone Wayne Phillips, class of 1960. Ralph Plumley, Jr., class of 1960. Charles Bingley Polk, class of 1960. Clyde Jackson Porterfield, Jr., class of 1960. James Eugene Ray, class of 1960. Dr. David Kent Reed, class of 1960. William M. Reagan, class of 1960. Donald F. Reynolds, class of 1960. Colonel Charles Z. Ridgway, Jr., class of 1960. Reverend Lawrence Oliver Robbins, class of 1960. Donald Jean Ross, class of 1960.
William Ryan Self, class of 1960. Leonard Wiley Shoemaker, class of 1960. John N. Sion, Jr., class of 1960. Jimmy Lee Smith, class of 1960. James Earl Stewart, class of 1960. Charles Evans Still, class of 1960. Dr. Charles Ernest Strauss, class of 1960. Mary Lee Van Natter, class of 1960. Don B. Walther, class of 1960. J. R. Wynn, class of 1960. John Robert Anderson, class of 1961. Larry Wayne Ayers, class of 1961. Michael John Bardis, class of 1961. Joseph Wendell Johnson Bircher, Jr., class of 1961. Donald Frank Boren, class of 1961. Donald R. Berg, class of 1961. Lester A. Burnett, class of 1961. Daniel E. Sigelski, class of 1961. Woodrow Harmon Cochran, class of 1961. Robert Fulton Collins, Jr., class of 1961. Don Wilson Copley, Sr., class of 1961. Colonel Herbert Lynn Curry, class of 1961. Don H. Davis, Jr., class of 1961. James Dennis Day, class of 1961. Martin E. Edwards, Jr., class of 1961. Philip Randolph Evans, class of 1961. Colonel William Kenneth Fatal, class of 1961. Gilbert Wayne Gatlin, class of 1961. Charles Leonard Gold, Jr., class of 1961. Ernest G. Gregg, class of 1961.
Dr. John W. Harris, class of 1961. Rodney Walton Heber, class of 1961. Dr. Patrick M. Henry, class of 1961. Donald Eugene Hens, class of 1961. Dr. Malcolm E. Hickman, Jr., class of 1961. Howell W. Holland, class of 1961. Robert William Hughes, class of 1961. Bobby Jean Lay, class of 1961.
Here.
Colonel Franz Michael Lay, class of 1961. Alan Lee Locke, class of 1961.
Here.
David N. Lupo, class of 1961.
Here.
June Ebb Likes, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Bobby T. Maggard, class of 1961.
Here.
Sidney D. Magnon, class of 1961.
Here.
Jean Maurice Marchand, class of 1961.
Here.
Charles Joseph Marietta, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Richard Archer Mays, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. George R. Meadows, class of 1961. Jerry Barnett Mitchell, class of 1961.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Robin Harrison Moore, Sr., class of 1961.
Here.
Thomas Brooks Moore, class of 1961.
Here.
Robert L. Nolan, class of 1961.
Here.
Richard S. Orr, class of 1961.
Here.
Joachim Paul Pater, class of 1961.
Here.
Colonel Lawrence E. Pennington, class of 1961.
Here.
Alfred A. Piper, class of 1961.
Here.
Raymond G. Post, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Robert H. Potter, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Robert Charles Potts, class of 1961.
Here.
Charles Frederick Richter, class of 1961.
Here.
Louis Philip Ring, class of 1961.
Here.
Ashley M. Rue, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Gary Lee Seisenbach, class of 1961.
Here.
John David Scrivenik, class of 1961.
Here.
Ronald Dean Smith, class of 1961.
Here.
Clifford W. Steelman, class of 1961.
Here.
Richard Kent Thomas, class of 1961.
Here.
Lawrence James Tidrick, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Gordon Richard Tupper, class of 1961.
Here.
Colonel Bobby Dean Underwood, class of 1961.
Here.
Johnny J. Vasilica, class of 1961.
Here.
Joe Glenn Williams, class of 1961.
Here.
Stuart M. Williams, class of 1961.
Here.
Joe J. Yanta, class of 1961. Major Benjamin M. Eudicis, class of 1961.
Here.
Robert Alanis, class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. Tommy Stephen Armstrong, class of 1962.
Here.
Charles Forrest Boer, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
Robert Philip Brooks, class of 1962.
Here.
Gerald S. Calvert, class of 1962.
Here.
Charles Robert Canterbury, class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. Stuart B. Carpenter, class of 1962.
Here.
Pat Thomas Clancy, class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. Junius M. Clark, class of 1962.
Here.
Larry Leon Claycomb, class of 1962.
Here.
Thomas Ross Connor, class of 1962.
Here.
Lieutenant Commander Doyce H. Cook, class of 1962.
Here.
Glenn Patrick Cragen, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
Joseph Leo Demiri, class of 1962.
Here.
Franklin Gordon Edwards, class of 1962.
Here.
Dennis Lee Fade, class of 1962.
Here.
Isaac Kendrick Fraser III, class of 1962.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel John William Fuhrer, class of 1962. Jerome Hubert Giller, class of 1962. Byron Floyd Good, Sr., class of 1962. Malcolm Wardlaw Hall, class of 1962. Dr. Gerald S. Harmon, class of 1962. Anastasio Herrera, class of 1962. Jennings Harvey Hill, class of 1962. Colonel Thomas A. Homan, Sr., class of 1962. Gary L. Holloman, class of 1962. Lieutenant Colonel James Ray Hawley, class of 1962. James Good Howell, class of 1962. Jack Dale Heisinger, class of 1962. Danny R. Jordan, class of 1962. James C. Carl, class of 1962. Edward Lewis Casper, class of 1962. Jerry Duncan Cassaw, class of 1962. Sam LaBarbera, Jr., class of 1962. Ray M. Morrison, class of 1962. Philip Hanley Pate, class of 1962. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Travis Payton, Jr., class of 1962. Dr. Gary T. Robinson, class of 1962. Donald Carson Sego, class of 1962. Albert E. Stray, Jr., class of 1962. John Lee Sullivan, class of 1962. Thomas Y. Swafford, class of 1962. Ronnie Wayne Treat, class of 1962. Joe Henry Talaska, class of 1962. Robert David Vaughn, class of 1962.
Charles William Warren, Jr., class of 1962. Delton L. Wise, class of 1962. Milton Paul Witt, Jr., class of 1962. Edwin Johnson Aarons, Jr., class of 1963. Dr. Robert Dorsey Barnes, class of 1963. Stuart James Beebe, class of 1963. James B. Briggs, class of 1963. James Charles Bruns, class of 1963. Don Richard Burns, class of 1963. Eris Dale Calhoun, class of 1963. Terry Don Cobb, class of 1963. David Bernard Donson, Sr., class of 1963. Thomas J. Enney, Jr., class of 1963. Clyde Rodney Flanagan, class of 1963. Nolan J. Foreman, class of 1963. Ronald Paul Free, class of 1963. Colonel Richard Morris Freund, class of 1963. Ellis Winford Fry, class of 1963. Philip Morris Gibson, class of 1963. Jack Alton Hamblett, Jr., class of 1963. Jerry E. Holligan, class of 1963. David Carlson Holman III, class of 1963. Joe Allen Jeffress, class of 1963. Paul Arthur Jenkins, Jr., class of 1963. Hardy Johnson, class of 1963. Robert Drake Jones, class of 1963. Arnold Sidney Kalla, class of 1963. James Lewis Jim Keller, class of 1963. William C. Curley, class of 1963.
Glenn Dale Keel, class of 1963. Seal Kutach, class of 1963. James Estel Lewis, class of 1963. James J. Sheridan Long, class of 1963. Fred E. Loom, class of 1963. Raymond Earl McLaughlin, class of 1963. Dr. Dennis K. McIntosh, class of 1963. James Scott McOwen, class of 1963. James Patrick Moore, class of 1963. Rex William Moore, Jr., class of 1963. Robert Eugene Morris, Jr., class of 1963. James Edwin Nelson, class of 1963. Thomas Kenneth Nelson, class of 1963. Terry Lee Newman, class of 1963. Dr. Charles F. Parker, class of 1963. Eugene G. Pavlett, class of 1963. Clarence Henry Potter, Jr., class of 1963. Brian Ralph, class of 1963. Dr. Brian Allen Reeves, class of 1963. Charles Ray Russell, class of 1963. William Donald Sanders, class of 1963. Gerald E. Shanks, class of 1963. Joel Burton Terrell, class of 1963. Perry Thompson, Jr., class of 1963. Reverend Ralph V. Thompson, class of 1963. Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Weaver, class of 1963. Joe Calvin Wheeler, class of 1963. James Riley White, Jr., class of 1963. Joe Bob Witt, class of 1963. Billy Jean Weesey, class of 1963.
James L. Adkins III, class of 1964. Dr. John Thomas Baldwin, class of 1964. Donald Edward Ballou, class of 1964. Vernon Douglas Barnes, class of 1964. Petronilo B. Barsalis, class of 1964. Patrick Joseph Barton, class of 1964. Ernest J. Brinkley, class of 1964. Dr. James E. Brown, class of 1964. Robert C. Brown, class of 1964. Colonel Robert Lloyd Cates, class of 1964. Don Barton Clements, class of 1964. John Robert Crane, class of 1964. Robert Owen Dial, class of 1964. Colonel Gerald Ray Donaldson, class of 1964. Lyndon Earl Donnell, class of 1964. James Henry Etcherhoff, Jr., class of 1964. Robert Henry Espy, Jr., class of 1964. Roger L. Felt, class of 1964. Dr. Elmer Foldbury, class of 1964. Colonel Jerry E. Fossum, class of 1964. Leslie Earl Hanks, class of 1964. Thomas Maxwell Hartley, class of 1964. Dr. Ronald F. Hooks, class of 1964. Dr. Roy Russell Huddleston, class of 1964. Dr. Paul Bernard Hudman, class of 1964.
Jimmy Jake Huffman, class of 1964.
Here.
John Russell Ihrig, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Howard C. Johnson, class of 1964.
Here.
M. Dale Keith, class of 1964.
Here.
Everett E. Kennemer III, class of 1964.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Howard P. Kenny, class of 1964.
Here.
Reverend James Walter Lanning, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Robert Arthur May, class of 1964.
Here.
David Leslie McGuire, class of 1964.
Here.
Earl A. Moffett, class of 1964.
Here.
James Roy Pete Moore, class of 1964.
Here.
Rogerio D. Morales, class of 1964. Jerry R. Mosley, class of 1964.
Here.
Dawson Richard Murchison III, class of 1964.
Here.
Stephen Leo Murphy, class of 1964.
Here.
Larry Dean Partridge, class of 1964.
Here.
Roman Joseph Peisinger, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
John W. Perry, class of 1964.
Here.
William Nathan Powers, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Richard L. Railston, class of 1964.
Here.
Paul Lee Rice, class of 1964.
Here.
Gary Dan Rudder, class of 1964.
Here.
Luther L. Sanders, class of 1964.
Here.
Walter E. Schappa, class of 1964.
Here.
Bruce Gordon Schulter, class of 1964.
Here.
Jan Leroy Smith, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Harvey Riley Stregler, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Frank Lee Supersinski, class of 1964.
Here.
Charles Frederick Tiemann, class of 1964.
Here.
Guillermo Jose Vela, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Marshall Wallace, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
John Dale Williams, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Terry Dale Allen, class of 1965.
Here.
James K. Atkins, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Bobby Jean Barham, class of 1965.
Here.
Urkel M. Barone, class of 1965.
Here.
Gus Tom Bates III, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Holland James Berry, class of 1965.
Here.
John Dennis Kamer, class of 1965.
Here.
Donald Darrell Carter, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. John P. Cassidy, class of 1965.
Here.
Walter L. Cheatham III, class of 1965.
Here.
Byron K. Culver, class of 1965.
Here.
William Lynn Davis III, class of 1965.
Here.
Conrado de la Garza, class of 1965.
Here.
Kent Maxwell Doak, class of 1965.
Here.
Edward R. Doolin, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Bivin K. Dunklin, class of 1965.
Here.
James Richard Durham, class of 1965.
Here.
Thomas O. Edling, class of 1965.
Here.
Robert Maxwell Arunimus, class of 1965.
Here.
William E. Farrow, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Stephen E. Fiddler, class of 1965.
Here.
Edwin Foster Gambrell, class of 1965.
Here.
Victor M. Garcia, class of 1965.
Here.
Cliff Andrew Harris, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Stephen F. Hartwell, class of 1965.
Here.
General Francis A. Hughes, class of 1965.
Here.
James P. Hupy, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. John Paul Edu, class of 1965.
Here.
James Arnold Jackson, class of 1965.
Here.
Colonel John E. Jackson, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Delmer Lester Yank, class of 1965.
Here.
Colonel Henry L. S. Jezik, class of 1965.
Here.
Gerald Boyd Jones, class of 1965.
Here.
Ronald J. Kent, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Harry B. Lagerstedt, class of 1965.
Here.
Alfred C. Lee, class of 1965.
Here.
James Arthur Lee, class of 1965.
Here.
Thomas Michael Matthews, class of 1965.
Here.
Gary Jean Mills, class of 1965.
Here.
Robert Max Neal, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
John Overton III, class of 1965. Stephen Knight Pedigo, class of 1965.
Here.
Douglas T. Pritzen, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Michael Bailey Sandford, class of 1965.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Frederick W. Sass, class of 1965.
Here.
William Frank Selmeyer, class of 1965.
Here.
William A. Sigurdsson, class of 1965.
Here.
Billy Ray Smith, class of 1965.
Here.
Jose Luis Solis, class of 1965.
Here.
Richard Michael Stevens, class of 1965.
Here.
Colonel John C. Stube, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Millard Lucian Tierce, III, class of 1965.
Here.
Pharrell J. Wallace, class of 1965.
Here.
Richard Edward Ricky Watley, class of 1965.
Here.
George Clark Wynn, class of 1965.
Here.
Ralph Bruce Abel, class of 1966.
Here.
Major John D. Allen, class of 1966.
Here.
David George Barker, class of 1966.
Here.
Mike Barton, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Paul Gene Bottoms, class of 1966.
Here.
Edward John Braden, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Gary H. Brotzy, class of 1966.
Here.
H. Powell Campbell, class of 1966.
Here.
Martha Tumlinson Casbier, class of 1966.
Here.
James Edward Caswell, class of 1966.
Here.
Ivar Brado Christensen, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Stanley R. Crump, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Michael L. Deason, class of 1966.
Here.
Rodney Lee Dockery, Sr., class of 1966.
Here.
Jack Robert Fickison, class of 1966.
Here.
James Robert Foster, class of 1966.
Here.
Stuart McIntosh Gardner, class of 1966.
Here.
Roger Thomas Gores, class of 1966.
Here. Here.
Dr. Gary B. Harvey, class of 1966. Dr. Claude William Hayes, class of 1966. Dr. Donald K. Hinkle, class of 1966.
Here.
Roberta L. Hersey, class of 1966.
Here.
Michael Kenneth Kia, class of 1966.
Here.
Robert Wilson Lane, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Carolyn K. Lewis, class of 1966.
Here.
James R. Lonan, class of 1966. Frank Henry Markey II, class of 1966.
Here.
Colonel Charles Orion McAdams, class of 1966.
Here.
Frank N. Miska, class of 1966.
Here.
John Mark Moore, class of 1966.
Here.
Robert Lee Mosty, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Michael Nelson Odom, class of 1966.
Here.
Milford Eugene Olson, class of 1966.
Here.
James I. Potts, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
William Michael Pratt, class of 1966.
Here.
Earl Alexander Price III, class of 1966.
Here.
James Albert Prugel, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Anthony Ranieri, class of 1966.
Here.
John Lawrence Randolph, class of 1966.
Here.
Robert W. Robinson, class of 1966.
Here.
Robert A. Rowland III, class of 1966.
Here.
Andrew Clyde Sauge, class of 1966.
Here.
James T. Sanders, class of 1966.
Here.
Jack Lee Skelton, Sr., class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Clifford Alcee Skiles, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Julian S. Smith, class of 1966.
Here.
William Phil Abernathy, class of 1967.
Here.
Gid B. Atkinson III, class of 1967.
Here.
Thomas Lynn Almond, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. Benjamin J. Bateman, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Edward Gerhart Bleecker, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Edward V. Breeding, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. John Ernest Bremer, Sr., class of 1967.
Here.
William John Burton, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Rayford Richard Carey, class of 1967.
Here.
Edmund B. Chambliss, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. P. Larry Claypool, class of 1967.
Here.
Ralph York Cobb, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Cecil G. Compton, class of 1967.
Here.
Leonard David Cooper, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. Clyde O'Brien Kraft, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. John Key Crane III, class of 1967.
Here.
Glendon Bruce Dezell, class of 1967.
Here.
Bill Dinwiddie, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Ruperto B. Escobar, class of 1967.
Here.
William G. Francis, class of 1967.
Here.
Michael Bruner Grau, class of 1967.
Here.
Ernest Morris Hudgens, class of 1967.
Here.
Thomas Wilson Hughes, class of 1967.
Here.
Jackie Johnson, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
William T. Koenig, class of 1967. Dr. James Ronald Kaiser, class of 1967. Dr. Donald Howard Lewis, class of 1967. Claude E. Lindsay, class of 1967. Lucius N. Lyons, class of 1967. Clayton Shelby McCown, class of 1967. Ronnie Lawrence McPherson, class of 1967. Irvin A. Meath, Jr., class of 1967. Colonel Robert K. Montgomery, class of 1967. Major Edward L. Moreau, class of 1967. Reverend Thomas J. Morgan, class of 1967. Dr. Douglas G. Nervell, class of 1967. Barry Lynn Phillips, class of 1967. Leonard L. Quirum, class of 1967. Sammy J. Ray, class of 1967. David A. Riesinger, class of 1967. Jerry Aubrey Rogers, class of 1967. Richard Carl Scott, class of 1967. Sidney I. Scott, class of 1967. Louis David Shows, class of 1967. Walter Jackson Smelly III, class of 1967. Roy Allen Smirkovsky, class of 1967. Robert Michael Starnes, class of 1967. Homer Douglas Underwood Sr., class of 1967. Lynn Andrew Waller, class of 1967. Dennis Ernest Wallow, class of 1967. William Allen White Sr., class of 1967. James William Wick, class of 1967.
Farewell, My Friends, by Rabindranath Tagore. It was beautiful as long as it lasted, the journey of my life. I have no regrets whatsoever, save the pain I'll leave behind. Those dear hearts who love and care, and the heavy with sleep, ever moist eyes. The smile in spite of a lump in the throat, and the strings pulling at the heart and soul. The strong arms that held me up when my own strength let me down. Each morsel that I was fed with was full of love divine. At every turning of life, I came across good friends. Friends who stood by me, even when the time raced by. Farewell, farewell, my friends. I smile and bid you goodbye. No, shed no tears, for I need them not. All I need is your smile. If you feel sad, think of me, for that's what I'd like. When you live in the hearts of those you love, remember then, you never die.
Colonel Ira R. Abbott III, class of 1968. Here. Dr. Natalia Childs Adams, class of 1968. Here. David Russell Axberg, class of 1968. Here. Jerry Lee Blasdell, class of 1968. Here. Walter Harrison Bradford, class of 1968. Here. Dewey G. Brasher, Jr., class of 1968. Here. Edwina Beth Brewer, class of 1968. Here. Thomas Candler, class of 1968. Here. Dr. Hollis Dale Chapman, class of 1968. Here. Dr. Raul Coy, class of 1968. Here. Jimmy Lucille Dixon, class of 1968. Here. Manuel Escontrias, class of 1968. Here. Cecil Burns Eubanks, Jr., class of 1968. Here. Michael K. Fisher, class of 1968. Here. Clifford Wayne Gillett, class of 1968. Here. Dr. Roger Bruce Harvey, class of 1968. Here. Milton Maxwell Hadaway II, class of 1968. Here. Lee William Horton, class of 1968. John Michael Hubert, class of 1968. George F. Jackson III, class of 1968. Charles W. Johns, class of 1968. H. Gene Jones, class of 1968. Albert Wayne Kessler, class of 1968. Dolores N. Klussman, class of 1968. Leslie Dix Lauder, class of 1968. Dr. Robert W. Lawless, class of 1968. James Clifford Lewis, class of 1968. William C. Lyles, class of 1968. Kenneth Abel Mattoon, class of 1968. Captain Russell Allen McCormick, class of 1968.
Dr. Victor Edward Mahawk, class of 1968. Travis Milton Miller, class of 1968. Michael B. Model, class of 1968. Maria E. Murray, class of 1968. Dr. Robert M. Owens, class of 1968. Robert Dwayne Pennington, class of 1968. Jimmy Dale Randolph, class of 1968. Major Hal B. Rigby, class of 1968. Ronald J. Robbins, class of 1968. James W. Robinson, senior, class of 1968. Terrence Lee Rocket, class of 1968. Abraham Herbert Sancher, Jr., class of 1968. Robert Bennett Shesky, class of 1968. Robert M. Schumacher, class of 1968. Robert Benton Stiles, Jr., class of 1968. Hugh Albert Turner, Jr., class of 1968. Dr. Don Walsh, class of 1968. Larry Nelson Wyndham, class of 1968. John Clay Wyatt, Sr., class of 1968. Lawrence J. Larry Zatopek, class of 1968. Charles M. Abrams, class of 1969. Marshall W. Alexander, Jr., class of 1969. Roy S. Beatty, Jr., class of 1969. Burke Allen Bowerslag, class of 1969. Sharon Giles Beck, class of 1969. Donald Walter Brogdon, class of 1969. George James Brown, class of 1969. Michael Larry Caswell, class of 1969. Richard Brian Chin, class of 1969. Lester Joseph Cranick, Jr., class of 1969.
Edgar Orville Eaton, class of 1969. Captain Arthur James Erickson, class of 1969. Marvin Hall Fletcher, Jr., class of 1969. Dr. Dwight L. Gailey, class of 1969. Peter DeWitt Green, class of 1969. Thomas Glenn Gunter, class of 1969. Dr. Richard Clay Haynes, class of 1969. Dr. David W. Hayes, class of 1969. Gary Don Hornback, class of 1969. Dr. Donald Robert Howard, class of 1969. Dr. Terry Allen Howell, Sr., class of 1969. James Morris Isom, class of 1969. Richard P. Jers, class of 1969. Dr. John David Jenkins, class of 1969. Norman Lee Jenkins, class of 1969. Jerry Dean Kershik, class of 1969. Charles Logan Kessie, class of 1969. Mohammed S. Khatri, class of 1969. James Donald Langham, class of 1969. James A. Lewis, class of 1969. Larry L. Ludke, class of 1969. Michael D. Lyons, class of 1969. Donald L. Maple, class of 1969. Gary Wayne Maruska, class of 1969. Gary Ray Mays, class of 1969. James Royce McCown, class of 1969. Dr. Charles Patrick McGraw, class of 1969. William Alva McKean, Jr., class of 1969. Thomas J. McMickle, class of 1969. Juan Manuel Medina, Sr., class of 1969.
John Henry Meyer, Jr., class of 1969. Jimmy Ray Messick, class of 1969. John Terrell Miller, class of 1969. William Thomas Morton, class of 1969. Edward G. Mullen, class of 1969. Marion A. Neisler, Jr., class of 1969. James Malcolm Norton, class of 1969. Leslie D. Pruitt, class of 1969. Gerald Lamar Snowden, class of 1969. Arthur C. Stites, class of 1969. Raleigh Buckner Thomason, Jr., class of 1969. Rocky Joe Thompson, class of 1969. Earl Clement Tingley, class of 1969. Patricia Voles, class of 1969. Duke G. Wilson, class of 1969. Ronald C. Walters, class of 1969. John David Young, class of 1969. Dr. Robert J. Anderson, class of 1970. Carlos Eugenio Aquino Gonzalez, class of 1970. Jimmy Allen Blackley, class of 1970. David Fred Blanchard, class of 1970. Dr. William H. Blewell, class of 1970. Joe D. Bunnock, class of 1970. Joanne D. Berger, class of 1970. Cyril N. Stoney Burke, class of 1970. Johnny Houston Butler, class of 1970. Carl J. Christensen, class of 1970. Philip George Day, Jr., class of 1970. Milburn Walter Deering, class of 1970. Thomas Jean Eden, class of 1970.
Dr. Mark Lee Edwards, class of 1970. Colonel Jack Hill Eldridge, class of 1970. Colonel Robert George Fettis, class of 1970. Bobby Ray Felkner, class of 1970. Joe Ann Gerson, class of 1970. David Martin Gilchrist, class of 1970. Dean Drake Green, class of 1970. Dr. Michael Raymond Green, class of 1970. Clinton Leroy Hafner, class of 1970. Raymond James Heine, class of 1970. Jack Russell Hockey, class of 1970. Marcus Lee Horton, class of 1970. Dale Bolton Hudson, class of 1970. James M. Jeter, class of 1970. Lawrence F. Johnson, class of 1970.
Billy W. Jones, class of 1970. Michael Darwin Jones, class of 1970. Gregory B. Kirchner, class of 1970. Robert Michael Karanka, class of 1970. Brett R. Lemberg, class of 1970. Lieutenant Colonel Edward B. License, Jr., class of 1970. Eugene Wayne Lightsey, class of 1970. Danny M. McDaniel, class of 1970. James R. McGehee, class of 1970. John Patrick McGraw, class of 1970. Larry L. Minter, class of 1970. George Wayne Moravec, class of 1970. James P. Newman, class of 1970. Albert W. Nugent, class of 1970. Arthur Kennedy O'Keefe, Jr., class of 1970.
Carol Ruth Phelps, class of 1970. John William Pinkerton, class of 1970. Linwood Mason Rabone, Jr., class of 1970. Dr. Charlene S. Ragsdale, class of 1970. Andrea K. Raymond, class of 1970. Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Reese, class of 1970. Dr. Alan Xander Reich, class of 1970. Larry Allen Riemenschneider, class of 1970. Barbara Lynn Riley, class of 1970. Marvin Lewis Robinson, class of 1970. Bob G. Rogers, class of 1970. William A. Schmidt, class of 1970. Ronald Bruce Smith, class of 1970. Dr. Johnny Park Snow, class of 1970. Newell Stanley, class of 1970. Robert Edward Tapia, class of 1970. Irvin C. Wells, Jr., class of 1970. Pat A. Wertheim, class of 1970. Dr. Michael Wilson, class of 1970. Dr. Kenneth James Wilson, class of 1970. Joel Don Wood, class of 1970. Robert Travis Wood, class of 1970. Edgar M. Woods, class of 1970. Artis V. Allman, class of 1971. James Ray Anderson, class of 1971. Terry James Arterburn, class of 1971. Dr. Royce Eugene Ballinger, class of 1971. Jerry Lee Bedrich, Jr., class of 1971. Raymond Way Bell, class of 1971.
Dr. Eugene E. Bendeley, class of 1971. Dr. James F. Biggart III, class of 1971. Michael Allen Blaschk, class of 1971. Guillermo Cisneros, class of 1971. David Norman Clammy, class of 1971. Evelyn C. Clements, class of 1971. Dr. James B. Crowell, Jr., class of 1971. Charles A. Daly, class of 1971. William Marvin Daniel, class of 1971. Harold S. Fisher, class of 1971. Macario Garza, class of 1971. Ronnie Dean Ron Ghani, class of 1971. Mary During Glenn, class of 1971. Bonnie Jean Peterson Glock, class of 1971. Scott McDonald Goodwin, class of 1971. William Allen Hardin, class of 1971. Dr. Charles D. Hayes, class of 1971. Roy R. Henning, class of 1971. Dr. David Dean Hopf, class of 1971. Ronald Bruce Layer, class of 1971. Dr. Thomas Allen Leonarduzzi, class of 1971. Donald Dean Maddox, class of 1971. Frank Donald McAllister, class of 1971. Mary Alice McCaskill, class of 1971. Danny Wayne McDonald, class of 1971. John P. McLean, class of 1971. Dr. Robert Stephen Neckon, class of 1971. Dennis W. Newton, class of 1971. Thomas Mark Rich, class of 1971.
Gordon B. Richardson, class of 1971. Dennis Joseph Savoy, class of 1971. Dr. Alan L. Smith, class of 1971. Robert Joseph Smirkowski, class of 1971. Harvey B. Swenson, Jr., class of 1971. Dr. Robert C. Cesaro, class of 1971. Scott Wayne Tanberg, class of 1971. Lieutenant Colonel Adrian G. Traz, class of 1971. Ronald Aaron Weinstein, class of 1971. Dr. William Wilson Abbott, class of 1972. Bobby Jack Arnold, class of 1972. Dr. Bradford W. Berry, class of 1972. Dr. Floyd Jean Bevers, class of 1972. Sandra Jean Camp, class of 1972. Dr. Teddy Lewis Coe, class of 1972. Tim Reagan Coden, class of 1972. Richard Dolph Kerb, class of 1972. James H. Dodson, class of 1972. Norman Eugene Duffield, class of 1972. Martha N. Evans, class of 1972. John C. Faulkner, class of 1972. Glenn G. Garrison, class of 1972. Judy K. Godwin, class of 1972. Dr. Donald E. Green, class of 1972. Judith Gale Groves, class of 1972. Keith Michael Hawkins, class of 1972. Joe Brian Hess, class of 1972. Don G. Eichert Jr., class of 1972. Michael David Jackson, class of 1972.
Dr. Clayton W. Kelly, Jr., class of 1972. Dr. Anatole Joseph Kern, class of 1972. Ronald Edward Kraft, class of 1972. Judith Ann Cradaville, class of 1972. Eduardo Lara, Jr., class of 1972. David Edward Lee, class of 1972. Wayne S. Lemberg, class of 1972. Richard C. Leon, class of 1972. Kenneth Dutton Lewis, class of 1972. William E. Lovelace, class of 1972. John R. Marshall, class of 1972. Dr. William D. Molman, class of 1972. Rodney I. Monkey, class of 1972. Robinson K. Neblett, class of 1972. Richard James Owen, class of 1972.
David Martin Phillip, class of 1972. Julio E. Richer, class of 1972. Melvin Curtis Russell, class of 1972. Surikant J. Shaw, class of 1972. Colonel Ronald E. Slack, class of 1972. Andrew Raby Smalley, class of 1972. Johnny Glenn Stansel, class of 1972. Thomas E. Stewart, II, class of 1972. Bobby J. Stillwell, class of 1972. David Ray Snotsky, class of 1972. William Richard Tonk, class of 1972. Colonel Michael Allen Thompson, class of 1972. Thomas Theodore Tibbles, class of 1972. Lieutenant Colonel Carl E. Truttle, class of 1972. Norman Wiley, Jr., class of 1972.
Kenneth J. Allison, class of 1973. Alan Glenn Badke, class of 1973. William Patrick Bambrick, Jr., class of 1973. Timothy Cliff Bauer, class of 1973. William George Becker, class of 1973. Michael Lloyd Blackwell, class of 1973. Rodney Eugene Blakey, class of 1973. Jean William Bonardin, Sr., class of 1973. Jeffrey Reed Brown, Sr., class of 1973. Stephen M. Brick, class of 1973. Dwayne Edward Bird, class of 1973. Gordon Kenneth Andrew Coleman, Sr., class of 1973. Darrell W. Dedman, class of 1973. Chris Darrington, class of 1973. J. Bradley Duzek, class of 1973. Billy Wayne Dyer, class of 1973. Dr. Edgar R. Fillmore, class of 1973. Larry Wade Flippin, Sr., class of 1973. Georgia Fraser, class of 1973. Miguel Pena Garcia, class of 1973. Dr. Ronald Jean Hodson, class of 1973. Paul G. Herman, class of 1973. Thomas J. Hefner, class of 1973. Peter John Huzik, class of 1973. Daniel E. Jameson, class of 1973. Chris Allen Johnson, class of 1973. Leo David Jones, class of 1973. Robert Allen Jones, class of 1973.
Dr. Billy Dan Camp, class of 1973. Paul A. Corrales, class of 1973. Franklin Gerald Linney, class of 1973. Dr. Dolores May Littlepink, class of 1973. James Patrick Lowe, class of 1973. John Lowe Lynn, class of 1973. Dr. Robert Lee Lyon, class of 1973. Dr. Morton P. Mabry, Jr., class of 1973. Edward Taylor Martin, class of 1973. George Lee McDonald, class of 1973. Lon Porter Messer, class of 1973. David M. Moreland, class of 1973. Major Kenneth C. Muth, Jr., class of 1973. Jean S. Newberry, class of 1973. Petra M. Rodriguez, class of 1973. Clarence Eugene Sasser, class of 1973. Mark Kevin Shamblin, class of 1973. Dr. Robert Wyatt Simmons, III, class of 1973. Dr. David Ray Smith, class of 1973. Dr. Martin David Springer, class of 1973. Clovis David Stone, class of 1973. William W. Sullivan, class of 1973. Dr. Glenn Allen Tate, class of 1973. Michael Glenn Totch, class of 1973. John Edward Thompson, III, class of 1973. Henry Felix Vincarlick, Jr., class of 1973. Charles Michael Wade, class of 1973. Pamela A. Wanja, class of 1973. Gregory Charles Weiss, class of 1973.
Dolores E. White, class of 1973. Danny Wayne Williams, class of 1973. Joseph Glenn Williams, class of 1973. Robert L. Williams, class of 1973. Dr. John E. Wyndham, class of 1973. Jackie Ann Wood Meadows, class of 1973. Dr. Richard M. Ambler, class of 1974. John Wesley Barton III, class of 1974. Dr. Leland Burleson Baskin, class of 1974. William Keenan Blewett, class of 1974. Mark Stephen Berger, class of 1974. Sherman Lee Click, class of 1974. Joel Christopher Cooley, class of 1974. Dr. Robert Edward Couch, class of 1974. Orville A. Darnaby, class of 1974. Marcelina Gonzalez de Leon, class of 1974. Dr. Robert E. Eskridge, class of 1974. Bobby G. Evans, class of 1974. Norman Valley Ginn, Jr., class of 1974. Tommy Joe Hoffer, class of 1974. Dr. Russell R. Hahn, class of 1974. Dr. James Alexander Hall, class of 1974. Kenita Ludicky Harvey, class of 1974. Dr. Donald Lee Hay, class of 1974. William S. Harridge, class of 1974. Joseph Benjamin Holly, Jr., class of 1974. Jill Renee Hubner, class of 1974. Herbert Scott Hughes, Sr., class of 1974. Bruce Sawyer Hutto, class of 1974.
Dr. Alan Jean Janacek, class of 1974. Dr. John E. Lindermuth, class of 1974. Dr. Lonnie West Luther, class of 1974. Charles Frederick Mailer II, class of 1974. Paul L. Malter, class of 1974.
Here.
James McCline Mann, class of 1974.
Here.
Patrick George Pat Merrick, class of 1974.
Here.
John Wesley Mask, class of 1974.
Here.
Colonel Jerry L. Maxwell, class of 1974.
Here.
Richard Michael McCabe, class of 1974.
Here.
Christine McCorkle, class of 1974.
Here.
Colleen Claire McKinney, class of 1974.
Here.
Colonel Edward N. McKinney, class of 1974.
Here.
Linda Diane Neal, class of 1974.
Here.
Magna Osby, class of 1974.
Here.
Robert Lynn Richards, class of 1974.
Here.
Randall Lee Riggs, class of 1974.
Here.
James C. Reich, Jr., class of 1974.
Here.
Thomas Joseph Roth, class of 1974.
Here.
Gary Lee Satterwhite, class of 1974.
Here.
Davis E. Schuneman, class of 1974.
Here.
Michael Stephen Sosby, class of 1974.
Here.
Clifton W. Steinbring, class of 1974.
Here.
Charles Randall Thomas, Jr., class of 1974.
Here.
Stephen Mack Timmons, class of 1974.
Here.
Wilden R. Tompkins, class of 1974. Dr. Thomas Frank Treat, class of 1974. Don Weldon Wood, class of 1974. John Herman Zinsmeyer, class of 1974.
Carol Ann Adams, class of 1975. Michael S. Alvarado, class of 1975. John P. Bayer, Jr., class of 1975. Dr. Barry Lee Beatty, class of 1975. Danny Wayne Burton, class of 1975. Chen Yuan R. Chow, class of 1975. Joe Raymond Cockrell, class of 1975. Carla D. Cole, class of 1975. Dr. Charles Crary Coleman, class of 1975. Patrick Lloyd Cohn, class of 1975. Deborah Jean Kapora, class of 1975. Bruce Lee Krager, class of 1975. Marjorie Jo Duke, class of 1975. James Franklin Erskine, class of 1975. Dr. Stephen Rice Fowler, class of 1975. Joseph Carl Fuller, Sr., class of 1975. Dr. Michael C. Gallagher, class of 1975. Jack Irwin Gasecki, class of 1975. Barbara Coulter Goodman, class of 1975. Mark Anthony Ghosh, class of 1975. Michael Douglas Greiser, class of 1975. David W. Griffiths, class of 1975. Jackie Jean Hanselman, class of 1975. Dr. Stephen L. Hatch, class of 1975. Danny Ray Hempill, class of 1975. Ronald Kenneth Holcomb, class of 1975. Rhonda Lynn Holmes, class of 1975. Susan Lynn Johnson, class of 1975. Arthur V. King, class of 1975. Roy Glenn Kitchens, class of 1975. Roger Dale Lawrence, class of 1975. William F. Mariuto, class of 1975. Jeffrey Lynn Martin, class of 1975. Douglas Steele Meaden, III, class of 1975. Maurice Lee Niles, class of 1975. James Lansom Rawson, class of 1975. Bobby Jane Schultz, class of 1975. Jan Elizabeth Scott, class of 1975. Dr. Samir E. Shalbaya, class of 1975. Judson Douglas Stelgis, class of 1975. Glenda Sue Stewart, class of 1975. Dr. Darlene May Tulene, class of 1975. Roman S. Waldron IV, class of 1975. Lucky Francis Wells II, class of 1975. Dr. Roger L. West, class of 1975. Richard L. Wilkinson, class of 1975. Lori Williams, class of 1975. Dr. Nancy Jane Wright, class of 1975. Dr. David Stiles Wire, class of 1975.
Glenn Murray Aubrey, class of 1976. Carla Sue Ballard, class of 1976. Darrell Lane Buffington Sr., class of 1976. Glenn David Bunnock, class of 1976. Roger Lewis Burchell, class of 1976. Paul Milton Boutade, class of 1976. William G. Collins, class of 1976. Samuel Lewayne Culpepper, class of 1976. Carolyn E. Dennett, class of 1976. Dennis Martin Evans, class of 1976. Catherine E. Flick, class of 1976. Leonard Lopez Flores, Jr., class of 1976. David John Polshinsky, class of 1976. Ronald J. Garrick, Sr., class of 1976. Dr. Arlen D. Good, class of 1976. Joanne Gray Hunter, class of 1976. Alex Edward Haas, Jr., class of 1976. Cheryl Jane Harris, class of 1976. Dr. Dennis Wayne Hill, class of 1976. Gay Ann Hill, class of 1976. James Albie Jackson, class of 1976. Ray E. Kennedy, class of 1976. Dr. James T. Kossib, class of 1976. James Ralph Landers, class of 1976. James Edward Linden, class of 1976. Dr. Robert C. Maris, class of 1976. Charles Eugene Mize, class of 1976. Frederick H. Olson, class of 1976. Richard Arlen Osborne, class of 1976. Dr. Robert K. Owen, class of 1976.
James Collier Phillips, class of 1976. Dr. Forrest C. Reinfort, Jr., class of 1976. Kenneth Donald Routh, class of 1976. Stephen D. Ruff, class of 1976. Ronaldo Santiago Santiso, class of 1976. Carl Blake Schwartz, class of 1976. Michael George Siller, class of 1976. Charles William Silvers, class of 1976. Peter H. Squire, class of 1976. Dr. Lawrence William Toffel, class of 1976. Billy Ed Thomas, class of 1976. Lorna Sue Thomas Murray, class of 1976. John Rodney Varner, class of 1976. Darrell Jonathan Vey, class of 1976. William E. Wood, class of 1976. Michael Jess Ayers, class of 1976. That was 1977. William Neal Bain, class of 1977. William C. Barnes III, class of 1977.
Dr. Bill T. Bouch, Jr., class of 1977. Glenn Patton Burt, class of 1977. Clifton Edward Butler, class of 1977. Carl Edwin Carter, class of 1977. Dr. James L. Casali, class of 1977. Douglas Allen Cavender, class of 1977. Dr. Peter Charles Cragg, class of 1977. Dr. Gianna Lou Crouch, class of 1977. Craig Rankin Dellery, class of 1977. Scott Kelvin Delpesky, class of 1977. Roger Coleman Ferguson, class of 1977. Andrew Galuski, class of 1977. Edmund Lee Gates, class of 1977.
Forrest L. Hesselbein, class of 1977. Eugene Hines, class of 1977. Cynthia J. Hochstetler, class of 1977. Ellen Marquis Horner, class of 1977. Mary Cecilia Hueso, class of 1977. Michael Jean Hughes, class of 1977. Daniel Ray Kurth, class of 1977. Donald Lynn Lane, class of 1977. Linda Gail Lekich, class of 1977. Larry Walker Lanfear, class of 1977. Sam Russell Leverett, class of 1977. Stephen C. Lundgren, class of 1977. Grady Wilson Manning, class of 1977. William H. Marr, class of 1977. Roy Thomas McCrory, class of 1977. Bobby Jack McGuire, class of 1977. Don Allen Riggs, class of 1977. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Andrew Sandberg, Jr., class of 1977. James M. Shankles, Jr., class of 1977. Curtis A. Spenrath, class of 1977. Kenneth Scott Steppen, class of 1977. Timothy Don Stover, class of 1977. Ricky Lee Sweat, class of 1977. Carlos David Torvald, Jr., class of 1977. Cynthia Horton Townsend, class of 1977. James R. Turner, class of 1977. Alan David Vasut, class of 1977. William S. Bill Whitehead, class of 1977. Stephen Curtis Wilmuth, class of 1977. Christopher Allen Young, class of 1977. Jean Paul Young, class of 1977.
Stand for Me by Patricia Bell Millsap, class of 1979. Will you stand for me at muster when I leave this earthly plane? Will you answer for me clearly when they call out my name? Will you speak of me a time or two when Aggies gathered round, especially at a football game at Kyle Field's hallowed ground? If you can do these things for me, I'll know I'm still a part of the school and friends I leave behind that filled this Aggie heart.
William G. Adkins, class of 1978. Philip D. Barrington, class of 1978. Gilbert R. Belota, class of 1978. Roger Edwin Bennett, class of 1978. Billy Jean Berney, class of 1978. Walter Scott Brank, class of 1978. Wyatt Lee Brooks, class of 1978. Dr. Patrick T. Connor, class of 1978.
Here.
Mary Ann Crenshaw, class of 1978.
Here.
Darrell Edwin Cummings, class of 1978.
Here.
Diane D. Dillingham, class of 1978.
Here.
Joseph L. Duffy, class of 1978.
Here.
Brian David Eckert, class of 1978.
Here.
Karen A. Eckert, class of 1978.
Here.
Richard Baldabino Flores, class of 1978.
Here.
David A. Giles, class of 1978.
Here.
Ashbel O. Gilliam, class of 1978.
Here.
Robert John Golden, Jr., class of 1978.
Here.
Ricardo G. Gomez, class of 1978.
Here.
Ronald Wayne Hewlett, class of 1978.
Here.
Robert Wayne Hoffman, class of 1978.
Here.
Stephen B. Hotman, class of 1978.
Here.
Kathy J. Husak, class of 1978.
Here.
Kimberly Troy Jackson, class of 1978.
Here.
Ronald Allen Jernigan, class of 1978.
Here.
Sherry R. Jones, class of 1978.
Here.
Elise Ann Kindler, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Joe Wayne Quarterlick, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Richard G. Legg, class of 1978.
Here.
James Howard Lennon, Jr., class of 1978.
Here.
David B. Madden, class of 1978. Michael Lee Mansfield, class of 1978.
Here.
Richard W. Martin, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. William John Mass, class of 1978.
Here.
Riley J. McDavid, class of 1978.
Here.
Kirk M. McKnight, class of 1978.
Here.
Dwayne Joseph Montiel, Sr., class of 1978.
Here.
Randy L. Nichols, class of 1978. Daryl Joe Piwanka, class of 1978. David Wayne Posey, class of 1978. John B. Prock, class of 1978. Diane Elise Rhodes, class of 1978. Roger Edgar Sage, Jr., class of 1978. Gail Nanette Saunders, class of 1978. Captain Gary Allen Seffel, class of 1978. Timothy Nathan Tejan, Sr., class of 1978. Joseph Anthony Torregrossa II, class of 1978. Stephen Grant Tutchke, class of 1978. Dr. Pat J. Unkefer, class of 1978. David Baxter Ward, class of 1978. Robert Wayne Weaver, class of 1978. Walter J. Wells, class of 1978. Susan Lynn Wise, class of 1978. Ronald Allen Yearout, class of 1978. Don Allen Zabchek, class of 1978. Terry Lynn Adcock, class of 1979. Michael Anthony Almaguer, class of 1979. Elizabeth Ann Ayers, class of 1979. Quinn D. Bagwell, class of 1979. Dr. Patricia E. Barber, class of 1979.
Robert Dean Brooks, class of 1979. Rhett Allen Butler, class of 1979. Fred Hudson Christian III, class of 1979. Gregory Lloyd Coker, class of 1979. Ralph Winstead Coley, class of 1979. Mary A. Colvin, class of 1979. Anne Louise Corso, class of 1979. Roger Burton Corzine, class of 1979. Julia Anna Cox, class of 1979. Edwin G. Eichner, class of 1979. Roseanne Eli, class of 1979. Elizabeth Ann Easel, class of 1979. Dr. Stephen C. Fisher, class of 1979. Jeffrey Charles Fulbright, class of 1979. Paul Brooks Harbin, class of 1979. Gregory James Harrelson, class of 1979. Mark Vincent Henneke, class of 1979. Vernon S. Holt, class of 1979. James Otto Holzem, Jr., class of 1979. David Wesley Hyde, class of 1979. Dr. Stephen F. Ilam, class of 1979. Dr. William Peter Kulveski, Jr., class of 1979. Paul Victor Loeffler, class of 1979. Karen Marie McCorbury, class of 1979. Carrie Bruce McPhee, class of 1979. Neil A. McManus, class of 1979. Timothy D. McNair, class of 1979. Lawrence Timothy McKiska, class of 1979. Kenneth J. Mueller, class of 1979. Larry Neil Nolan, class of 1979. Tammy Ann Orth Higgins, class of 1979. Michael Anthony Plock, class of 1979. Vernon Joseph Plowman, class of 1979. Kim Lee Rogerson, class of 1979. Paul Thompson Schreiber, class of 1979. Kathleen Adele Shoemaker, class of 1979. Gary Lynn Snowden, class of 1979. Marion Houston Sweat, class of 1979. Patrick S. Sweeney, class of 1979. John Stephen Walquist, class of 1979. Joe M. Wanenmacher III, class of 1979. Larry Clifford Watley, class of 1979. Thomas Richard Whitlow, class of 1979. George Woodard III, class of 1979. Ronald S. Bender, class of 1980. Lavon G. Boyajian, class of 1980. Cassie R. H. Brown, class of 1980. Charles E. Charlie Brown, class of 1980. Stephen Lee Cleveland, class of 1980. Kathy Ann Frederick, class of 1980. Michael G. Frenzel, class of 1980. Dr. George R. Froh, class of 1980. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Warren Hiles, class of 1980. Barry James Hans, class of 1980. Michael Wallace Huddleston, class of 1980. Brian P. Josart, class of 1980. Frederick Thomas Casper, class of 1980. David Lee Kendrick, class of 1980.
Here.
Alette Gwen Kennedy, class of 1980.
Here.
Joan Elaine Clausen, class of 1980. Timothy Paul Leitner, class of 1980.
Here.
Robert Lee Lewis, Jr., class of 1980. Here. Randall Scott Long, class of 1980. Here. Paul T. McCord, class of 1980. Nancy Sims Meehan, class of 1980. Ron Wayne Mills, class of 1980. Leisha H. Mogford, class of 1980. Philip Donovan Moore, class of 1980. Charles J. Mott, class of 1980. James Kelly Mowry, class of 1980. Jackie Ray Odom, Jr., class of 1980. Joel H. Quick, class of 1980. Edwin Albert Reed, Jr., class of 1980. Zeta Virginia Satterwhite, class of 1980. Deanna Marie Smith, class of 1980. Samuel R. Solano, class of 1980. John Barrett Sullivan, class of 1980. Dr. Ann M. Thurston, class of 1980. Stephen Russell Turner, class of 1980. Dorothy J. Ziegler, class of 1980. Lisa Jane Beatty, class of 1981. Randy Dean Beckman, class of 1981. Dr. Doris L. Carver, class of 1981. George Chung Chin, class of 1981. Patrick Theodore Indy, class of 1981. Beverly Joe Engel, class of 1981. Susan V. Harding, class of 1981. Julia Elizabeth Keith, class of 1981. Catherine J. Kaursky, class of 1981.
Lawrence Lee Criv, class of 1981. Charles Ruzel Leggett, class of 1981. David Lee Limert, class of 1981. Gregor Robert Lippold, class of 1981. Michael Thomas Little, class of 1981. Vincent Joseph Lucchese, class of 1981. Karen Lynn McLaughlin, class of 1981. Denise Ann McWilliams, class of 1981. Lonnie Dub Murphy, class of 1981. Donald Wayne Myers, class of 1981. Pamela Joyce Myers, class of 1981. Melvin Benjamin Nelson, Jr., class of 1981. Robert Gerald Parent, class of 1981. Carol M. Parson, class of 1981. Barbara E. Rapstein, class of 1981. Thomas Gordon Saunders, class of 1981. Lisa G. Shelby, class of 1981. Ronnie Glenn Scala, class of 1981. Floyd Theodore Skeen, class of 1981. Kane Crawford Turner, class of 1981. Stephen E. Underwood, Sr., class of 1981. Stephen Vance Wadding, class of 1981. Dr. Marie M. Walbridge, class of 1981. Dr. Randall D. Walker, class of 1981. Robert Bruce Wallace, class of 1981. Kyle W. Westfall, class of 1981.
Here.
Major Richard F. Wolf, class of 1981.
Here.
Dr. Lario Vincent Iarino, Jr., class of 1981.
Here.
George Ray Yurgal, class of 1981.
Here.
Kevin Henry Brennan, class of 1982.
Here.
Armando R. Canales, class of 1982.
Here.
Jamie D. Carter, class of 1982.
Here.
Robert James Fitzgerald, class of 1982.
Here.
Mary R. Gooden, class of 1982.
Here.
Edward C. Greger, Jr., class of 1982.
Here.
Ronald J. Harbeck, class of 1982.
Here.
Gordon John Hagen, class of 1982.
Here.
Charles Eugene Jensen, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Kurt M. Loof, class of 1982.
Here.
Linda Darlene Lopez Sims, class of 1982.
Here.
The Honorable Karen A. Mitchell, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Peter Edward Nielsen, class of 1982.
Here.
Mary F. Perez, class of 1982.
Here.
Mary H. Edmondson Porch, class of 1982.
Here.
William Edwin Reese, Jr., class of 1982.
Here.
Andrew Murray Reither, class of 1982.
Here.
Mark J. Robinson, class of 1982.
Here.
Patricia Ann Says, class of 1982.
Here.
Paul Gregory Schleider, class of 1982.
Here.
Revis D. Sapansky, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Sergio Othen Serna Saldivar, class of 1982.
Here.
Rodney W. Slaughter, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Robert Joe Wallace, class of 1982.
Here.
Jane Louise Anderson, class of 1983.
Here.
Dr. Joanne Shelbourne Barrage, class of 1983.
Here.
Stephen Bryant Bisbee, class of 1983.
Here.
Keith W. Capps, class of 1983.
Here.
Clay John Carballo, class of 1983.
Here.
Michael Sawyer Carson, class of 1983.
Here.
Renee R. Crocker, class of 1983.
Here.
Harold D. Curry, class of 1983.
Here.
William R. Dudley, class of 1983.
Here.
Patricia K. Grell, class of 1983.
Here.
Raymond A. Hafner, class of 1983.
Here.
John Richard Helzel, class of 1983.
Here.
James Marshall Huff, class of 1983.
Here.
Doris May Hunter, class of 1983.
Here.
Gordon Robert Johnson, class of 1983.
Here.
Darrell J. Kelso, class of 1983.
Here.
Maxwell H. Mayhew, class of 1983.
Here.
Kirk Matthew Mullinax, class of 1983.
Here.
Thomas P. Olzowski, class of 1983.
Here.
Dr. Richard L. Fuchfelder, class of 1983.
Here.
Gregory Harrison Ramirez, class of 1983.
Here.
Barry William Robinson, class of 1983.
Here.
Paul Christopher Salvia, class of 1983.
Here.
Granger Wheaton Smith IV, class of 1983.
Here.
Jennifer S. Spencer, class of 1983. Byron Stewart Stevens, class of 1983.
Here.
David Scott Wagner, class of 1983.
Here.
Donald P. Welsh, class of 1983.
Here.
Dr. Mark E. Westhusen, class of 1983. Philip Walker Windsor, class of 1983. Carl Eric Wolf, class of 1983.
Here.
Alonzo Church Wood, class of 1983.
Here.
Eugene D. Arcand, class of 1984.
Here.
Deanna Robertson Biggers, class of 1984.
Here.
Renee Brisboe Barres, class of 1984.
Here.
Kyle Boyd Daniels, class of 1984.
Here.
David Lee Donnelly, Jr., class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Sally H. Dukin, class of 1984.
Here.
David Allen Felkman, class of 1984.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Robert Telford Green, class of 1984.
Here.
Joseph Patrick Gutowski, class of 1984.
Here.
Mark Edward Haas, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Sidney Joy Jaffe, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Johnny Clay Johnson, class of 1984.
Here.
Stephen Todd Johnson, class of 1984.
Here.
Julie Lee Keller, class of 1984.
Here.
Fernando V. Luna, class of 1984.
Here.
Jose Guadalupe Luna, class of 1984.
Here.
Monty May, class of 1984.
Here.
Cheryl Webb McGinty, class of 1984.
Here.
Thomas K. Nyland, class of 1984.
Here.
John Charles Richardson, class of 1984.
Here.
Carol Annette Shipley, class of 1984.
Here.
Gregory Reed Simmons, class of 1984.
Here.
Lori L. Smith, class of 1984.
Here.
Robert Richard Springborn, class of 1984.
Here.
Rose Ann Springfield, class of 1984.
Here.
Karen D. Steger, class of 1984.
Here.
Anna T. Tanetti Sanchez, class of 1984.
Here.
Jose T. Trevino, class of 1984.
Here.
Tim Willett, class of 1984.
Here.
Elizabeth A. Zorn, class of 1984.
Here.
Stuart C. Churchill, class of 1985. Kinley S. Dulliver, class of 1985. Jack Ingle, class of 1985. Thomas R. Evans, class of 1985.
Here.
Maureen Ann Mitchell Haferteep, class of 1985.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel James B. Hampton, class of 1985.
Here.
John Clay Hart, class of 1985. Thomas Scott Hopkins, class of 1985. Charles Arthur Hubbard, class of 1985. Dr. Susan L. Humble, class of 1985. Gregory Allen Hunter, Sr., class of 1985. Dr. James Stanley Hunter III, class of 1985. Frank J. Jowdy, class of 1985. Francis Thomas Kiefel, class of 1985. John Byron Mack, class of 1985. Tracy Glenn Menier, class of 1985. Richard F. Martin, class of 1985.
David R. Mathurin, class of 1985. Dr. Karen McBee, class of 1985. Peter L. Philp, II, class of 1985. Monique DeBrule Reed, class of 1985. Deborah Joyce Richards, class of 1985. Antonio F. Sarabondo, Jr., class of 1985. Susan L. Souls, class of 1985. Charles Marsh Stroder, class of 1985. Rebecca Lynn Swears, class of 1985. Dr. Donald Christie Tracy, class of 1985. Kenneth David Ward, class of 1985. Donna Jean Watson, class of 1985. Carol A. Williams, class of 1985.
Melody Lynn Ashmore, class of 1986. Kelly Ann Baird, class of 1986. Cheryl Ann Bonnet, class of 1986. Dr. Karen Sue Bradley, class of 1986. Richard Luther Brown, class of 1986. Tracy Knight Casto, class of 1986. Brian Edward Collins, class of 1986. Andrea May Fallebrown, class of 1986. William Martin Gaddis, class of 1986. Robert Red Gibbons, Jr., class of 1986. Paul J. Hausman, class of 1986. Luis Emil Havelka, Jr., class of 1986. Deborah M. Hendricks, class of 1986. Michael Butler Johnson, class of 1986. Dr. Stephen Mills Kaiser, class of 1986. Dr. William Frank Kordsmeyer, class of 1986. Michael W. LaRosa, class of 1986. Alicia Catherine Macchia, class of 1986. Shoshana Masery, class of 1986. Thomas Bernard McCourt III, class of 1986. Catherine J. Mellinson, class of 1986. Brian Bennett Myers, class of 1986. Curtis David Parent, class of 1986. Dr. Barbara Ann Wise Probe, class of 1986. Catherine Leslie Roth, class of 1986. Rebecca Marie Ruiz, class of 1986. Gregory Paul Schroeder, class of 1986. Celia Louise Shrine, class of 1986. Mary Luck Stanley, class of 1986. Dr. Neil D. Tyndall, class of 1986.
Dr. Norman Lane Traylor, class of 1986. Charles J. Wheat, Jr., class of 1986. Jacqueline S. Beasley, class of 1987. Robert Edward Bell, class of 1987. Dr. Stephen Castleberry Brown, class of 1987. Dr. Vincent Brian Canizzato, class of 1987. Dr. James M. Cargill, class of 1987. John Cassidy Cheeser, class of 1987. Dr. David Sebastian Koss, class of 1987. Dr. Carol Louise Current, class of 1987. Anthony J. Fitzsimmons, class of 1987. Donna R. Hurst, class of 1987. James R. Hudson, class of 1987. Catherine Janelle Johnson, class of 1987. Dr. Ruth Tucker Marcotte, class of 1987. Rodney J. Martine, class of 1987. Dr. Eva Charlene Mayberry, class of 1987. Dr. Sandra A. McCalla, class of 1987. Edward D. Palacios, class of 1987. Lisa Lively Reed, class of 1987. Patrick Thomas Riley, class of 1987. William S. Reynolds, class of 1987. Luis A. Salinas, class of 1987. Stephen M. Schultz, class of 1987. Brian Keith Veille, class of 1987. Janice Childs Weichert, class of 1987. Sandra J. Wesch, class of 1987. Michael Dell Wheeler, class of 1987. Philip Vaughn Wingate, class of 1987. Conrad R. Yu, class of 1987.
Rhonda Leanne Arnett, class of 1988. George Robert Barth, class of 1988. Mark Allen Bell, Sr., class of 1988. James K. Elisser, class of 1988. Marcia L. Freeman, class of 1988. Leslie P. Ginn, class of 1988. Jennifer R. Grassman, class of 1988. Karen K. Hearn, class of 1988. Jennifer Ray Hilliard, class of 1988. Leonard Jet Hobbs, Jr., class of 1988. Caroline Elizabeth Hawley, class of 1988. Karen K. Inman, class of 1988. Nancy M. Johns, class of 1988. James R. Lindholm II, class of 1988. David Edwin McKay, class of 1988. Dr. William T. Melton, class of 1988. Mark T. Motley, class of 1988. Brian West Nascora, class of 1988. Hector Rivera, class of 1988. Carl Richard Ralph, class of 1988. Jeffrey A. Scott, class of 1988. Kenneth Lee Shablock, class of 1988. Dr. Dennis Lee Smart, class of 1988. Dr. Gordon Lee Smith, class of 1988. Michael Patrick Spencer, class of 1988. Melissa M. St. John, class of 1988. Dr. Mark G. Toohey, class of 1988.
Stanley Joe Bevers, class of 1989. Susan Hodges Bingham, class of 1989. Jefferson Edward Bridgman, class of 1989. Chris Warren Campbell, class of 1989. John David Dendy, class of 1989. Michael Ellis Easley, class of 1989. Kimberly File, class of 1989. Catherine M. Fritz, class of 1989. Rosalinda Garza, class of 1989. James C. McElrath, class of 1989. Jana L. Middleton, class of 1989. Norman Quintero, class of 1989. Kenneth J. Rizzuto, class of 1989. John K. Rowe, class of 1989. Robert Sean Rudisil, class of 1989. Dr. Grant W. Simpson, Jr., class of 1989. Dr. Penelope L. Skelly, class of 1989. Kevin P. Whiteley, class of 1989. Alan J. Alschwedi, class of 1990. Dr. Francis A. Akpadak, class of 1990. Tammy Lynn Alford, class of 1990. Pamela A. Armentrout, class of 1990. Kathleen M. Arthurs, class of 1990. Joseph M. Breen, class of 1990. Tricia Butler, class of 1990. Andrew Chambers III, class of 1990. Cynthia L. Kroom, class of 1990. Brian Maurice Edwards, class of 1990. Freeman Lloyd Fox, class of 1990.
Allison Froneberger, class of 1990. Gabriel Evan Garcia, class of 1990. David Earl Goodson, class of 1990. Dr. Andrew Wilson Griffin, class of 1990. William Charles Heyman, class of 1990. Julie Carol Holloway, class of 1990. Michael Harding Johnson, class of 1990. Dr. Brenda A. Lorick, class of 1990. Dr. Carrie Elaine Moore, class of 1990. Michael D. Rankin, class of 1990. Audra D. Riopelli, class of 1990. Lisa Ann Wilhite, class of 1990. Dr. Michelle D. War, class of 1990. Yvonne Elise Adams, class of 1991. Darren Andrew Brown, class of 1991. Ronald C. Brownlow, class of 1991. Catherine Rose Bruce, class of 1991. Randy Marcel Duvalier, class of 1991. Jill Marie Flatt, class of 1991. Macy Lee Gilmore, class of 1991. James Walter Goldsmith, Jr., class of 1991. Jennifer Lee Halleck, class of 1991. Gregory Scott Hutchinson, class of 1991. Rose Marie Hume, class of 1991. Brandy Lee Jenkins, class of 1991. Dr. Curtis Lee Kaiser, class of 1991. Amy Jo Kennedy, class of 1991. Darren Glenn Lewis, class of 1991. Julie Keith Livingston, class of 1991.
Sandra Sue Lorenz, class of 1991. Edwin M. Matlock, class of 1991. Judith Nelson Miller, class of 1991. Dr. Kevin John O'Neill, class of 1991. Joyce H. Pitzer, class of 1991. Charles R. Pete Robertson, Jr., class of 1991. Stephen Keith Smith, class of 1991. Tammy Lim Spangler, class of 1991. Curtis Homer Villarreal, class of 1991. Mark Allen Zimbrod, class of 1991. Kristen K. Chapman, class of 1992. Dr. Dallas Henderson Cheek, class of 1992. Barbara Frances Collier Foyt, class of 1992. Julie Elizabeth Crockett, class of 1992. Edwin H. Harris III, class of 1992. Andrew S. Huff, class of 1992. Jerlaine C. Jacob, class of 1992. Charles Cecil James, class of 1992. Garrison J. Kent, class of 1992. Francis M. Kirkendall, class of 1992. Dr. Jeffrey Don Linder, class of 1992. Sally Jo Locarnini, class of 1992. Kara M. Mangum, class of 1992. Donald Spencer Peterson, class of 1992. Mary Frances Regenbrecht, class of 1992. Shane K. Sullivan, class of 1992. Patricia B. Swigert, class of 1992. Terry Ann Turley, class of 1992.
Ruth Marie Alt, class of 1993. Clinton Doyle Byram, class of 1993. Kevin P. Costigan, class of 1993. Dr. Deanna S. Cross, class of 1993. Houston Franklin Duncan, class of 1993. Mark Preston Felton II, class of 1993. Dr. David Earl Harrington, class of 1993. Thelma Durham Eisenhart, class of 1993. Dr. Jeffrey Dean Maka, class of 1993. Kelly Michelle Mock, class of 1993. Dr. Virginia E. Metz, class of 1993. Catherine Myers Sabum, class of 1993. Vincent L. Simmons, class of 1993. Eric William Strom, class of 1993. Dr. Margaret D. Watson, class of 1993. Dr. Donald W. Wells, class of 1993. Dustin Lee Faulkner, class of 1994. Garrett Joe Garrison, class of 1994. Robert William Havey, Jr., class of 1994. Kristen P. Kell, class of 1994. Dr. Vincent Mark Messbarger, class of 1994.
Here.
Jeffrey Allen Miller, class of 1994.
Here.
James C. O'Kins, class of 1994.
Here.
John H. Schramm, class of 1994.
Here.
Brett Shirk, class of 1994.
Here.
Elizabeth B. Stewart, class of 1994.
Here.
Dr. Milton Glenn Thomas, class of 1994.
Here.
Dr. Chris Kim Toe, class of 1994.
Here.
Robert G. Villaranga, class of 1994.
Here.
Jeffrey Craig Williams, class of 1994.
Here.
Mary Kathleen Wilson, class of 1994.
Here.
Thaddeus Robert C. Wright, class of 1994.
Here.
Alan J. Weiss, class of 1994.
Here.
Dr. David Matthew Zuffel, class of 1994.
Here.
Dr. Bruce G. Chabot, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Lei M. Chan, class of 1995.
Here.
Franklin Rudolph Cook, class of 1995.
Here.
Keith M. Fair, class of 1995.
Here.
J. Allen Faulkner, class of 1995.
Here.
David Kirk Heidman, class of 1995.
Here.
J. Don Howe, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Hilaire A. Kallendorf, class of 1995.
Here.
Amy Lee Kiker, class of 1995.
Here.
Heather Nicole Jill McHill, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Regina Eloise Munson, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Ronald Kelvin Nelms, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Samuel S. Sampson, class of 1995.
Here.
Paul M. Sensiba, class of 1995.
Here.
Charles Philip Chuck Stow, class of 1995.
Here.
Stephen Monroe Tinkle, class of 1995.
Here.
Albert Burrell Campbell, class of 1996.
Here.
Joyce Elaine Chavez Whitney, class of 1996.
Here.
Christopher Davis Lacey, class of 1996.
Here.
Quentin A. Manson, class of 1996.
Here.
Nathan Craig McElrath, class of 1996.
Here.
Dr. Edwin Thomas Melendez, class of 1996.
Here.
Colin Richard Oker, class of 1996.
Here.
Mark David Peterson, class of 1996.
Here.
Michael Lee Phillips, class of 1996. R. Thomas Robinson, class of 1996.
Here.
John David Walker, class of 1996. Sarah D. Zom, class of 1996. Gregory E. Greg Ziegler, class of 1996. Delilah Alexander Spade, class of 1997. Bradley David Carey, class of 1997. Dr. Anap Darabell, class of 1997. Michael J. Flood, class of 1997. Jason Leon Jablecki, class of 1997. Jacob Anthony Jackson, class of 1997. Savandra S. Lassier, class of 1997. Gregory Eugene Lee, class of 1997. Dr. Theodore William Ted Legatsky, II, class of 1997. Autumn Kara Lindsay, class of 1997. Dr. James W. Marr, class of 1997. Dr. Heather Janine Mahoney, class of 1997. Dr. Gail Annette Medor, class of 1997. Philip Damian Morales, class of 1997. Jeffrey Allen Ortner, class of 1997. Denise Marie Perkins, class of 1997. Stephen H. Rhodes, class of 1997. Ryan Eugene Roy, class of 1997. Dr. Robert John Vakorka, class of 1997. Stacy Lee Walker, class of 1997. Judy Faye Wapples, class of 1997. Jennifer Joan Wickersham, class of 1997. John C. Wright, class of 1997. Richard M. Young, class of 1997.
Craig C. Albright, class of 1998. Kristen Lee Roberson Alcott, class of 1998. Eleanor Shaw Claiborne, class of 1998. Cynthia Haas Davis, class of 1998. Shirley Ann Eamon, class of 1998. Judith Harriet Kenworthy, class of 1998. Nicholas Francis Link, Jr., class of 1998. Gregory Todd May, class of 1998. Todd Kent Overton, class of 1998. John Randall Satterwhite, class of 1998. Stephen Wayne Walker, class of 1998. Dalton Eugene Ziegler, class of 1998. Robert Benjamin Awalt, class of 1999. Jeremy W. Barnes, class of 1999. Lauren Dean DeWeese, class of 1999. Jason Travis Diamond, class of 1999. Amber Elaine Espinosa, class of 1999. Dr. Michael Perry Germano, class of 1999. Jennifer Lynn Griffith, class of 1999. Hunter Edward Hardaway, class of 1999. Dr. Chang Hee Kim, class of 1999. Dr. Jason Arturo Longoria, class of 1999. Bethany A. Nasser, class of 1999. Amanda Jean Parsons, class of 1999. Dr. Emilio Rendon, class of 1999. Dr. Walter Hugh Tillman, Sr., class of 1999.
Kelly Lynn Aiken, class of 2000. Beverly Ann Boggs, class of 2000. Sean Aaron Carnahan, class of 2000. Jose Luis Cavazos, class of 2000. Jean A. Cornelison, class of 2000. Peggy Ann Fisher, class of 2000. Jerry Scott Lozek, class of 2000. Charles W. Murphy, class of 2000. Kevin Lynn Palmer, class of 2000. Lee William Reese, class of 2000. Gilbert J. Riojas III, class of 2000. Micah B. Roberts, class of 2000. Dr. Peter A. Simon, class of 2000. Shay Mangy Wilcox, class of 2000. Troy Stephen Allen, class of 2001. Theodora V. Boehm, class of 2001. Shannon Ashley Cook, class of 2001. Joseph Daniel Culver, class of 2001. Meredith Page Fox, class of 2001. Dr. Cynthia Carolyn M. Kennedy, class of 2001. Mary Calissa Knipe, class of 2001. David S. Magonier, class of 2001. Ern C. Mooney III, class of 2001. Trent Joseph Pearson, class of 2001. Walter Wesley Watley, class of 2001.
Catherine Michelle Cotton, class of 2002. Susan Renee Duncan, class of 2002. Dr. Erica Marie Garza, class of 2002. Michael Lawrence Hogg, class of 2002. Stephen Anthony Luna, class of 2002. Sarah E. Sunchens, class of 2002. Hillary York Sullivan, class of 2002. Jessica L. Anarook, class of 2003. Kevin Lee Berry, class of 2003. Ariana Margaret Cavalli, class of 2003. Jonathan William Craig, class of 2003. Deanne Michelle Giese, class of 2003. Dr. Gary Ray Hansen, class of 2003. Christian Abel Wipaya Lopez, class of 2003. Sarah Marie Jackson, class of 2003. Dr. Michael John Lynch III, class of 2003. Brian Daniel Poe, class of 2003. Elwin Eugene Burrow, class of 2004. Christine Elizabeth Copeland, class of 2004. Brent Allen Humphrey, class of 2004. Kimberly K. Littleton, class of 2004. Brian Neil Martin, class of 2004. Reagan Elizabeth Miller, class of 2004. Jessica Ray Bergen, class of 2005. Amy Jinjin Kaito, class of 2005. William Ford Dishman, class of 2005. Kevin Michael Harbor, class of 2005. Ryan K. Hinkson, class of 2005. Lance Lewis Neal, class of 2005. Rachel Denise Nobles, class of 2005. Andrew Evans Trent, class of 2005.
Dr. Rebecca Marie Benedict, class of 2006. Dallas Morgan Dees, class of 2006. Lorelei Ann Hathcote, class of 2006. Dr. Lucy Elaine Larison, class of 2006. Andrew Jacob Ramos, class of 2006. Clayton Golden Robinson, class of 2006. Catherine Michelle Werner, class of 2006. Aaron Leslie Whitney, class of 2006. Dr. Twyla Jeanette Williams, class of 2006. Lindy Inez Wynn, class of 2006. Robert Frederick Baylor, class of 2007. Jesus Javier Estrada, class of 2007. Krista Charity Finstuen, class of 2007. Kemper Joseph Gleason, class of 2007. Thomas Christopher Hartley, class of 2007. Melissa Michelle Monk, class of 2007. Hui Hu Wen, class of 2007. Alexandria R. North, class of 2007. J. Wilson Robertson, class of 2007. Aaron Michael Cerna, class of 2007. Brandon Troy Talbot, class of 2007. Kimberly Armilla Zimmer, class of 2007. Gregory Brooks Barth, class of 2008. Christopher Rogers Clifton, class of 2008. Karen Yvette Elsie Collins, class of 2008. Herbert Earl Dunnington IV, class of 2008. Luis Claudio Freer, class of 2008. Leslie Ariel Gunn, class of 2008. Kelly Michelle Jackson, class of 2008. Megan Nicole McCafferty, class of 2008. Crystal Lucia Santana, class of 2008. Kevin Andrew Schmidt, class of 2008. Evan Christopher Sturl, class of 2008.
All is Well by Henry Scott Holland. Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed, at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effect, without the trace of shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well.
Michelle Christina Kahn, class of 2009. Dean Caleb Leathers, class of 2009. Jeffrey Adam Miles, class of 2009. Rebecca Kathleen Rollins, class of 2009. Casey Renee Corder Stasny, class of 2009. Brandon Eric Stray, class of 2009. James Nicholas Ursulo, class of 2009. Travis David Brand, class of 2010. Jonathan David McGregor, class of 2010. Captain Frank Cass Miller IV, class of 2010. Arthur Schron Moore, Jr., class of 2010. Dr. Lena Zhu, class of 2010. John Edward Beck, class of 2011. Ryan Bradley Jones, class of 2011. Shelley Brianne McDonald, class of 2011. Jasmine Lang Westcott, class of 2011. Joseph Martin Aguilar, class of 2012. Spencer Thomas Hansen, class of 2012. Sean Preston Johnson, class of 2012. Desiree Dawn Nolly, class of 2012. Jason Robert Prince, class of 2012.
Eric Joseph Brown, class of 2013. Evan Ray Kirk, class of 2013. Jacqueline Nicole Soros, class of 2013. Bailey Elizabeth Wilpitz, class of 2013. Jonathan David Barron Womer, class of 2013. Olivia Grace Zydek, class of 2013. Colin Vincent Breslin, class of 2014. Jonathan DeWitt Dews, class of 2014. Austin Matthew Mallet, class of 2014. Michael Andrew McCullough, class of 2014. Daniel Cole Fields, class of 2015. Elizabeth Jean Frazier, class of 2015. Jordan Dallas James, class of 2015. Graham Michael McNair, class of 2015. Keith Taylor Moore, class of 2015. Dylan Cade Shelton, class of 2015. Samuel James Spadon, class of 2015. Jackson Edward Dorbar, class of 2016. Drew Dalton Featherston, class of 2016. Michael Douglas McAfee, class of 2016. Michelle Irene Ramsey, class of 2016. Tyler William Robertson, class of 2016. Catherine Buelo Charbeno, class of 2016. Matthew Douglas Bancroft, class of 2017. Rogelio Olivares, class of 2017. Ashley Lynn Fan, class of 2017.
Gerardo Rosalio Garcia, class of 2018. Ana Marie Orsini, class of 2018. Jessica Lee Sloan, class of 2018. Jonathan William Stanish, class of 2018. Allison Ann Cooper, class of 2019. Garrett Ross Pendergast, class of 2019. Peter Fawn, class of 2019. Bradley Stephen Slusher, class of 2019. Logan Douglas Wells, class of 2019. Russell Wendell Richardson Sr., class of 2020. Madeline Elizabeth Shar, class of 2020. Eric Latod Trimble Jr., class of 2020. Dustin Edward Holta, class of 2021. Bryce Douglas McDonald, class of 2021.
Lance William Milk, class of 2021. Jacob Michael Miller, class of 2021. Juan Nicholas Restrepo Hernandez, class of 2021. Alejandro Rodriguez IV, class of 2021. Hunter Michelle Crane, class of 2022. Matthew David Elmer, class of 2022. Jared Dale Hunt, class of 2022. George Martin Lubrano, class of 2022. Catherine Ann Bennett, class of 2023.
Weston James Keller, class of 2023. Brian Alexander Tripsa, class of 2023. Alexis Kendall Watson, class of 2024. Blake Mackenzie Williamson, class of 2024. Joshua Ray Bilbrey, class of 2025. Madison Elizabeth Bragg, class of 2025. James Thomas Donald, class of 2025. Ethan Walker Canthak, class of 2026. Alice Zing, class of 2025. El Shaddai Bekele Getnet, class of 2026. Katie Deanna Hunsinger, class of 2026. Cameron Chase Lepsky, class of 2026. Julius Dean Stockton, class of 2026. Alexander Thomas Bull, class of 2027. Lyndon Cradle Colbert, class of 2027. Thomas R. Connolly, class of 2027. Victor Guerrero, class of 2027. Molly Nicole Sims, class of 2027. Nickman Saroff, class of 2028.
The next segment of the worldwide roll call for the absent includes honored faculty, staff, and friends of Texas A&M.
Dr. James C. Bradford.
Here. Here.
Barbara Canfield Childers.
Here.
Dr. Dara W. Childs.
Here.
Claude Edward Davidson.
Here.
Dr. Charles Dwayne Johnson.
Here.
Dr. Ronald D. Kay.
Here.
Susan May Lancaster.
Here.
Dr. Rachel D. Lazarov.
Here.
Dr. Darrell W. Morgan.
Here.
Dr. Melanie J. Moser.
Here.
John P. Pitts.
Here.
Dr. Thomas R. Tom Saving.
Here.
Dr. Bir Bahadur Singh.
Here.
Lias B. Steen.
Here.
Dr. S. Bradley Vinson.
Here.
Juanita Ellen Witham.
Here.
Janet C. Avery.
Here.
Barbara Sue Burnett.
Here.
Sue Carper Cat.
Here.
Bonnie Burris Denny.
Here.
Brenda M. Dressner.
Here.
Mary Lou Gonzalez.
Here.
Cynthia Hornberg.
Here.
Barbara B. Hunter.
Here.
Larry Marriott.
Here.
Judy Northcott.
Here.
Larry Ross Cook.
Here.
The final segment of the worldwide roll call for the absent comprises corrections to some names that were called incorrectly or that were inadvertently omitted earlier in the reading of this roll.
James Edward Gardner, Jr., class of 1945. Charles Blakey Locke, class of 1946. Dr. Joseph Patrick Brannon, class of 1948. Billy Frank Bounds, class of 1950. Boris Reagan Birch, Jr., class of 1952. Dr. Dale Edward Walston, class of 1952. Edward Anton Conderla, Sr., class of 1953. Joseph C. Yannicka, class of 1954. Gerald Joseph Nelson, Sr., class of 1955. James Robert Crouch, class of 1957. Eloy R. Villa, class of 1957. Lieutenant Colonel Albert L. Yantis, Jr., class of 1959. Joachim Paul Pater, class of 1961. John David Scrivanik, class of 1961. David Carson Holman III, class of 1963. Arnold Sidney Kalla, class of 1963. J. Sheridan Long, class of 1963. Stephen Leo Murphy, class of 1964. Bivin H. Dunklin, class of 1965. Jose Luis Solis, class of 1965. Michael William Pratt, class of 1966. Dr. P. Larry Claypool, class of 1967. Dr. James Michael Wilson, class of 1970. Michael Allen Blaschke, class of 1971. Dr. Marlon David Springer, class of 1973. Linda Diana Neal, class of 1974. James Franklin Erskine, class of 1975. Roy Glenn Kitchens, class of 1975. Lori Williams, class of 1975. David John Folchinsky, class of 1976. Michael Jess Ayers, class of 1977. Scott Kelvin Del Pesce, class of 1977. Gilbert R. Belota, class of 1978. Darrell Edward Cummings, class of 1978. Ashbel O. Gilliam, Jr., class of 1978. Michael Anthony Almaguer, class of 1979. Casey H. Brown, class of 1980. Stephen Bryant Brisbane, class of 1983. Renee R. Crooker, class of 1983. John Richard Holzell, Jr., class of 1983. Doris Marie Hunter, class of 1983. Paul Christopher Saliba, class of 1983. Ana F. Tanetti Sanchez, class of 1984. Deborah Joyce Richards, class of 1985. Marcia L. Freeman, class of 1988. Catherine J. Melanson, class of 1986. Dr. David Sebastian Koss, class of 1987. Edward D. Palacios, class of 1987. Janice Childs Weichert, class of 1987. J. Don Howe, class of 1995. Heather Nicole Jaley McMahill, class of 1995. Dr. Samuel S. Sampson, Jr., class of 1995. Joyce Elaine Cheeves Whitney, class of 1996. Quentin A. Mason, class of 1996. Colin Richard Ocker, class of 1996. Ryan Eugene Roy, class of 1997. Dr. Robert John Bokerka, class of 1997. Michael Douglas McAfee, class of 2016. Ethan Walker Kanthak, class of 2025. John T. Pitts. Marcia L. Freeman, class of 1988. Joaquim Paul Pater, class of 1961. Quentin A. Mason, class of 1996.
In memoriam by Lieutenant Colonel David Hannigan, class of 1968. We stood a little taller, a little prouder then, when we heard the call of muster and roll call just begin. We stood there all together and wiped away the tears when our names were called out softly and answered with a "here." So we've joined together with our brothers of the past to make our final resting place at Aggie Land our last. We take a toast to our brotherhood wherever they may roam. For us, the trek is over. Aggie Land, we're coming home.
My fellow Aggies, the 2025 Worldwide Muster Roll Call is complete. On behalf of the Association of Former Students and the Worldwide Aggie Network, thank you for sharing this time with us today. We close this Worldwide Muster Roll Call with a salute. We salute Texas A&M, the unique American institution that helped shape us into the people we have become and that still shapes us today. We salute the countless Texas Aggies who give so selflessly of their time and energy by volunteering to plan and host hundreds of musters around the world. And we salute each and every one of the Aggies we've lost this past year. The 2,327 friends and family members whose names we called and for whom we proudly answered "here" marking them forever present in our hearts on this Aggie Muster Day. The Worldwide Aggie Muster is dismissed until April 21st, 2026. Until then, I charge you each to remain firm in your loyalty to humanity and your country, and to keep warm in your hearts your affection for one another and for our beloved alma mater. May good fortune smile upon us until we meet again some other day. And until we do, may all of our lives be filled with the spirit of Aggieland.
Some may boast the prowess bold of the school they think so grand, but there's a spirit can ne'er be told. It's the spirit of Aggieland. We are the Aggies are we, true to each other as Aggies can be. We've got to fight, boys, we've got to fight. We've got to fight for maroon and white. After they boosted all the rest, then they will come and join the best. For we are the Aggies are we. We are from Texas AMC.